One night, inside a quiet house, a tense discussion began. Jack looked at the young girl in front of him and asked if she was the alchemist. He then asked for her name. The girl calmly introduced herself as Alice. Jack immediately praised the name and treated their meeting like a pleasant surprise. For a brief moment, the two simply stared at each other, measuring one another in silence. However, Alice soon found something strange. She had believed the golem sensor was broken, but the truth was far more unusual. Jack did not have any man at all. To her, he was the first person like that she had ever seen. That discovery only made Jack more curious. Since Alice understood magic and matters related to it, he saw her as the perfect person to question. Alice accepted that much and asked what he wanted to know. Jack made it clear that the answer would require a long story. A few hours earlier, Jack had been outside on lookout duty, scanning the area through binoculars while speaking through his walkie-talkie. He identified himself as Bomber and called headquarters for a response. They answered quickly and asked what the issue was. Jack reported that he had recovered the chip, but the enemy had prepared a welcome party for him. He requested immediate backup. However, headquarters had no intention of helping. They bluntly told him it was not happening and suggested he escape on his own. Jack forced out a stiff laugh, though the irritation was clear. Being abandoned like that was not something he planned to forget. What they did not know yet was that Jack always found a way to return trouble with interest. Even alone, Jack was already preparing a show of his own. He waited patiently for the enemy cars to move close enough to the hidden bombs. Then, at the perfect moment, the explosives went off. The first blast launched vehicles into the air, and the chain reaction sent more cars crashing and scattering across the area. In an instant, the hunters became the ones caught in chaos. Jack watched the destruction with open amusement. For him, the scene was not fearsome or tragic. It was simply entertaining, and the night was only getting started. Later, a squad of soldiers stormed the building where Jack was hiding. He calmly waited above them, ready to welcome his guests in his own style. The men spotted his position and rushed forward, but one of them stepped on a hidden wire. The next second, the trap exploded. The soldiers were thrown into confusion. Some tried to understand what happened, while others quickly realized they were dealing with a bomber and began searching for more traps. However, Jack was already moving to the next part of his plan. Wearing a gas mask, he revealed himself and tossed tear gas onto the floor. Thick smoke spread through the room at once. Soldiers coughed hard, their eyes burning as they struggled to see. Gunfire burst through the haze, but Jack was already running through the chaos. In the middle of the smoke, one soldier desperately searched for him. Then Jack suddenly appeared at close range, aimed his gun, and fired before disappearing again toward the exit. The remaining soldiers finally recognized exactly who they were facing. It was Bomber. They rushed after him, determined not to let him escape. More importantly, they needed to recover the chip at any cost. But then, during the chase, one of the men suddenly exploded. The others instantly understood the danger. Jack had planted landmines as well. By the time they reacted, Jack had already escaped in a van. Inside the vehicle, he drove off in a good mood, mocking the men left behind and suggesting they would need hundreds more if they wanted to take him down. For Jack, danger was just another part of the fun. Later, he stopped at a gas station and casually opened a beer. However, he quickly noticed the stolen van was becoming far too obvious. He began thinking it might be smarter to hitchhike and disappear. But then something far stranger happened. A bright circle of light appeared beneath his feet. Jack froze in place, unable to move. Before he could react, he vanished from the spot entirely. Moments later, he opened his eyes inside a grand castle. Knights in full armor surrounded the hall. Nobles stood nearby, watching with interest. And ahead of him were several other people from his own world, all gathered in the same place. At the far end sat a king upon his throne. Jack could only stare in confusion as the truth slowly formed around him. What he doesn't know yet is that his wild knight had just entered a completely different world. Soon after, a man stepped forward and welcomed the summon group. He introduced himself as Prime Minister Vilash and formally greeted the people from another world. Prime Minister Vilash addressed the summon group and revealed the truth. They were no longer in the world they came from. They had been brought into another world entirely, called here as a final weapon in an ongoing war against neighboring countries. The room reacted with shock, but one of the summoned quickly understood the situation and recognized that they had been called to another world. Vilash seemed pleased by the fast understanding and praised the boy's sharp mind. He then continued by giving them a grand title. In this kingdom, they were to be treated as heroes. He expressed his wish that they would become the blades that protect and strengthen the nation. Jack listened to all of this with clear doubt. Another world, heroes, war, destiny. To him, it sounded less like fate and more like some strange joke. However, Vilash moved forward without pause. He announced that he would now confirm everyone's status immediately. Beside Jack, a glowing screen suddenly appeared. It displayed his name, level, rank, karma, and skills. Jack looked over the floating panel and quickly accepted that this world seemed to follow very different rules. His eyes first landed on a skill called Translation Bee. That explained how everyone was understanding one another. Even the Japanese students nearby made perfect sense to him now. But then his attention shifted to another skill, Bomb Making EX++. Jack could tell it was something rare, though he had no clear idea how it worked yet. Still, he found it amusing that a world asking for heroes had welcomed someone known for explosions and destruction. In a strange way, it felt like a perfect match. When Valash looked at Jack's status screen, his calm expression finally broke. He could hardly believe what he was seeing. An EX skill alone was rare enough, but one ranked even higher than expected was something he had never witnessed before. However, what mattered most was something else entirely. Valash quickly turned to one of the knights and ordered him to bring a certain item at once. The knight obeyed immediately, while the room grew even more curious about Jack. Later, Valash returned with an item and handed it to Jack. The moment Jack looked inside, he recognized the contents immediately. They were ingredients used for making bombs. Valash seemed pleased that Jack understood at once. He wanted to witness the power of Jack's EX rank skill with his own eyes. Jack accepted without much concern and calmly sat down. Then he began the process. After some time, the work was complete. Jack had created a simple gunpowder explosive bomb. Its displayed rank was F, with a power level of 5. Jack also noticed something unexpected. He could read the bomb's features as if the item itself was giving him information. However, Valash was far from impressed. He examined the bomb and saw nothing special. To him, it looked like an ordinary explosive with no clear value. He quickly judged Jack's skill as nothing more than a way to improve the chances of successful bomb making. Jack quietly considered that this still sounded fairly useful, but Valash had already made up his mind. He loudly declared Jack's work worthless. In his view, anyone could learn bomb making through effort alone, even without such a skill. He dismissed the upgrades as meaningless and labeled Jack's ability as hopeless. Then Valash turned to the king and presented his conclusion. Out of all the summoned people, Jack alone was useless. He was only level 1 and had no other skills to support him. The other summoned people began to chuckle and mock him after hearing his level and abilities. What had started as a grand summoning quickly became a public embarrassment. The king gave his own judgment soon after. A level 1 person was not even worth using as a foot soldier. He ordered the guards to take Jack away. Before they reached him, Jack instinctively tried to reach for something behind his back. But then he remembered the truth. His bag had been left behind at the gas station. With that option gone, he simply gave in, noting that the guards had the numbers advantage anyway. However, Valash was not done humiliating him. He suggested that if Jack was truly that useless, then selling him to the slave market might be the better option. He doubted Jack would even be worth much. Jack remained confident and argued that selling him cheaply would be a waste. According to him, many people would pay a high price just to hire someone like him. That answer earned him a sharp slap across the face. The castle hall had made its choice, and Jack had just become its lowest value guest. Jack brushed off the slap as if it meant nothing and warned Valash not to think he could treat him however he wanted. He then leaned in close, his tone calm but threatening. Beneath the playful look, there was clear danger. Valash answered with pride and reminded Jack of his current position. In this castle, Jack had no power at all. To prove that lesson, he ordered the guards to act. The soldiers rushed in and beat Jack to the ground. Jack endured every strike without resisting. He understood that fighting back too early would only make things worse. For the moment, patience was more useful than anger. After the beating, Valash mocked him again and asked if the lesson had finally worked. He warned that if Jack kept that attitude, death would be the next punishment. Around them, the other summoned people simply watched. None stepped forward. They only looked down at Jack while guards pinned him to the floor. Jack returned their stares and remembered every face. Then everything changed in an instant. Jack suddenly broke free, rushed forward, and drove a punch straight into Valash's face. The Prime Minister crashed back in pain before anyone could react. Before the room could recover, Jack had already drawn a gun. He pressed it to Valash's head and fired. Then he fired again and again. The Grand Hall froze in shock as the man who welcomed the heroes fell dead on the floor. Jack looked down at the body and coldly reminded him of the warning he had ignored. The guards immediately surrounded Jack and raised their weapons. But Jack moved first. He grabbed one soldier and used him as a shield just as the others opened fire. Their own ally took the bullets meant for him. When the shooting stopped, Jack casually mocked them for how little they cared about their comrade and dropped the lifeless body aside. One furious guard charged in rage, but Jack answered by drawing his dagger. In one swift motion, he cut the man down. Then he moved through the others one by one, striking fast and clean as more soldiers fell across the hall. Some of the remaining men could hardly follow his speed. Jack casually noted that this was only level 1 strength. That statement shook the room more than the bloodshed itself. From the throne, the king finally shouted and demanded to know what kind of man Jack really was. Jack responded by tossing something directly toward him. The king caught it by instinct and looked down in confusion. It was a grenade. Jack calmly revealed that the grenade was more than a weapon. To him, it was a business card, a $1 million offer for hire under the name Bomber Mercenary. Then it exploded directly in front of the king. The blast tore through the throne room and through the castle into panic. However, Jack had already moved. Using a grappling hook, he launched himself away and escaped through the castle before anyone could stop him. After landing safely outside, he laughed to himself. Escaping with a grappling hook felt exactly like something out of a spy movie, and for a moment he seemed to enjoy the style of it all. But the fun did not last long. Nearby guards were already shouting fresh orders from the king. The command was simple and absolute. The otherworld bomber was to be executed on sight. Every soldier was ordered to hunt him down and make sure he did not escape. Jack was surprised the king had survived the blast at all. He admitted to himself that things had gone a little too far, though much of that chaos had started because he lost his temper. As he moved through the city, Jack took in the strange world around him. Cars rolled beside horse-drawn carriages as if both belonged together. The sight was so absurd that under normal conditions, he might have taken a ride just to enjoy it. Instead, he kept running. He focused on the practical side first. Steal a vehicle, leave the city, and deal with complaints later. He was grateful he still had some gear with him. If armed guards blocked the way, taking their weapons was always an option. However, in the middle of planning his escape, Jack suddenly stopped. A different thought hit harder than any guard could. They were the ones who summoned him. They were the ones who insulted him, beat him, and tried to throw him away. So why was he the one running? Why should he be the one forced to escape? Then he remembered the other summoned people still inside the castle. The same people who stood there and looked down on him while he was treated like trash. That was the moment his path changed. Jack slowly turned his eyes back toward the castle. Escape was still possible, but revenge suddenly sounded much better. With a calm smile, he decided the party was not over yet. Later, Jack made his way back inside and began dealing with the guards one after another. As he fought through them, his mind was already working on something bigger. If a bomb were planted in the right place, the damage could be far more than local chaos. Then his attention shifted upward. Something above the area caught his eye, and he turned to an elf woman nearby for answers. She explained that the object was the city's core, a magic device that controlled the mechanisms of the entire imperial capital. In simple terms, it was the heart of the city. That was all Jack needed to hear. A heart. Core. To him, that sounded like the perfect target. The elf woman quickly warned that destroying it would be reckless. Recreating such a delicate device would be nearly impossible. In the worst case, the entire empire could be reduced to rubble. However, Jack only focused on one part of her warning. Technically, it could be blown up. To the elf woman's horror, that single detail was enough. Jack then remembered the insult the Lash had thrown at him earlier, claiming his skill only guaranteed success in bomb making. Instead of arguing, Jack chose to test that idea himself. He threw something toward the city's core and decided it was worth trying. Almost immediately, the core began to behave strangely. The elf woman could hardly understand what was happening. A device meant to control the whole capital was now reacting in ways it never should have. Sensing disaster, she turned to leave. But then Jack called after her, reminding her that they had come this far together. In his eyes, they were already partners in crime. The elf woman begged to be spared and insisted she had already helped enough. Jack calmly admitted that she had indeed been useful. Then, without hesitation, he shot her in the head. In Jack's world, gratitude and mercy were never the same thing. Jack calmly decided it was time to prepare a picnic spot with a good view. Nearby, two men were discussing a strange magic reaction coming from inside the city. One of them decided to check the source himself. However, before he could take even a few steps, Jack suddenly appeared, grabbed the man by the face, and slammed him into the wall. He then turned to the second man and focused on something more useful, a car. Later, far away from the city, Jack arrived at a high point where the entire capital could be seen in the distance. He looked over the landscape and judged it to be the perfect viewing spot. Quiet, clear, and far enough away to enjoy the results. He thought about everyone who had kept pushing him, insulting him, and trying to use him. Then he pressed the detonator. The city's core erupted in a massive explosion. Fire and smoke swallowed the capital in seconds. When the smoke finally cleared, the result was clear. The entire city had been wiped out. Jack stared at the destruction and burst into laughter. Even he seemed impressed by how complete the damage was. For someone who enjoyed chaos, this was a masterpiece. Back in the present, inside the house with Alice, Jack finally finished telling the full story. That was why he wanted to return to his own world. Somewhere along the way, he had heard rumors about an alchemist, and that rumor had led him here. Now he turned to Alice and waited for her thoughts. If she knew anything that could send him back, then this strange meeting might become useful after all. Alice listened as Jack casually revealed that he had blown up the imperial capital. It was the kind of statement that should shake anyone, yet as usual, she stayed calm and unreadable. She dismissed it at first like a bad joke. However, Jack made it clear he was completely serious, and soon enough, the whole world would likely know it too. Alice looked at the claim from a practical angle. Even with the help of imperial mages, turning the city's core into a bomb should have been impossible. What made it stranger was that she could not sense any mana from him at all. Jack admitted that much himself. He could not even make something simple like a fireball. But then, he explained that he had been given a different kind of power. To prove it, Jack opened his status screen and let Alice inspect it. The moment she read it, even she was impressed. Among all the skills listed, one stood above the rest, bomb-making EX++. For Alice, this was beyond rare. An A-rank skill was already the mark of a master. The X belonged in stories told to children. But Jack's skill had gone even further, carrying 2 extra marks beyond that impossible rank. She understood what it meant immediately. This was not normal talent. It was a force beyond human understanding, the kind of power that could make the impossible real. Jack, meanwhile, reacted far more casually than expected. Instead of fear, he seemed almost pleased with himself. Alice quickly reminded him that this power belonged to him, whether he liked it or not. Jack only brushed it aside, saying it had been forced onto him without warning. Still, he admitted he was starting to enjoy the results. Alice then pointed out the strange numbers on his status screen. That caught Jack's attention too, and it reminded him of what happened only a few hours earlier. After the bombing of the city, Jack had been driving away when his car suddenly overheated. Stranded in the middle of nowhere, he could only curse his luck. He regretted not asking for a way home before destroying everything. At the same time, he could not ignore an old flaw in himself, that dangerous urge to go too far whenever provoked. To make things worse, he had even forgotten his cigarettes. A truly rough day. Still, Jack reasoned that if people in this world could summon him here, then maybe they could send him back as well. In a place where floating status boards appeared like game menus, almost anything seemed possible. That was when he noticed something shocking. His level had risen from 1 all the way to 385. His class had changed into bomber, and his karma had dropped to -600. There was only one explanation that made sense. Blowing up the entire city had rewarded him with a mountain of experience points. Somehow, mass destruction had become the fastest leveling method imaginable. Jack could only stare at the numbers in disbelief. In the games he remembered, level caps used to stop at 99. But then again, newer games had moved past that rule. What he doesn't know yet is that this world may have no limits at all. After seeing his level jump to impossible numbers, Jack quickly realized something important. If levels worked like games, then his body might have changed too. There was only one way to know. He started to run. The moment he moved, he nearly scared himself. His speed exploded so fast that he almost slammed straight into a rock. He barely managed to stop in time, but the sudden force still cracked the stone in front of him. Jack then picked up broken chunks from the rock and tested his strength. To his surprise, the stone crumbled in his bare hand as if it were a dry cracker. That was all the proof he needed. Leveling up in this world did not just raise numbers. It raised his body as well. Now fully excited, Jack embraced the moment. In his mind, a new hero had arrived. Naturally, the next thing to test was flight. If he had speed and strength, why not flying too? However, reality was less generous. No matter what he tried, the sky was not part of the package. Still, he realized he could probably destroy every Olympic high jump record without much effort, so it was not a total loss. With fresh confidence, Jack made a simple plan. He would run around until he found a town. And if luck stayed on his side, maybe he would even get a super suit by Christmas. Back in the present, Alice continued studying his status screen. The more she checked, the stranger it became. There were no signs of forgery or fake numbers anywhere. Everything appeared real. Jack seemed relieved to hear that. He had already been thinking about what to do if he got questioned again. Alice immediately focused on that word, Kin. Jack then recalled what happened at the town gate. While checking his status screen, the guards noticed one detail first, -600 karma. That alone made him look like a walking disaster. Then they saw level 385, which only made things worse. To them, the numbers looked impossible. If not fake, then dangerous. Either way, they wanted answers. Jack explained that from his side, he was neither fake nor dangerous. But when a man gets cornered after such a warm welcome, things can become complicated very quickly. Alice then asked the most important question of all. If the guards were that suspicious, how exactly did he get through them? Jack's eyes widened the moment she asked. What he doesn't know yet is that this part of the story may be even harder to explain than blowing up a capital city. Jack casually explained that he and the guards had simply shared some friendly conversation. However, the real story was far less peaceful. He had opened fire on them with his gun and followed it up with grenades before forcing his way through. Even so, Jack described it differently. In his version, he had given them something valuable, and they kindly let him pass. Alice listened to the answer and, surprisingly, accepted it without much reaction. She then moved to the next question. If the numbers on his status screen were real, where had he gone after leaving the gate? Jack once again gave the clean version of events. He claimed that while searching for a way home, some kind local people had offered to help him. But the truth was rougher than that. Jack had beaten those same locals down and pressed a gun on one of them until he got answers. Under pressure, the man told him there was someone in town who might know more. A witch who could possibly use space magic, unlike himself. That word immediately caught Jack's attention. The beaten man explained that she was actually an alchemist who lived in town and made money selling homemade potions. However, rumors about her power had spread far beyond that. Some fools once tried to break into her home and rob her. None of them ever returned. Since then, no one dared trouble her again. Jack had expected a witch to be some cruel old monster from stories. Instead, reality stood right in front of him. Alice calmly confirmed the image in her own way, then shifted the topic. She admitted she was curious about his strange skills, but for now, it was already time for supper. She invited him to eat first. Jack did not hesitate for even a second. After everything that had happened, free food sounded like a blessing. Alice then prepared the meal in the most unexpected way possible. She clapped her hands once. Suddenly, a group of golems appeared behind Jack carrying food like trained servants. The surprise hit him immediately. These stone beings moved with purpose and followed her commands without hesitation. Alice explained that they were golems she had created herself, and they existed to obey her orders. Jack stared at them in disbelief. To him, this looked less like old fantasy magic and more like advanced machines. If they followed commands this perfectly, then in his eyes, they were basically robots. Alice admitted she had no idea what Jack meant by robots. However, she clearly enjoyed using her creations as helpers, referring to the golems almost like children while letting them serve the meal. Soon, the table was ready. Jack looked over the dishes in front of him with caution and curiosity. He had no clue what any of it was made from, yet everything looked strangely similar to food from his own world. The smell was rich, warm, and inviting. At the very least, it did not seem poisoned. Being welcomed into someone's home and given food so quickly made Jack suspicious in a different way. For a brief moment, he wondered if Alice had taken interest in him, but then he remembered the rumors surrounding the witch's cottage, the place where unwanted visitors supposedly never returned. That thought alone was enough to keep him alert. Still, he decided that if anything strange happened, he would handle it himself. However, the moment he tasted the food, most of that tension faded. It was genuinely delicious. In his eyes, it could use a little salt, but even without it, the meal was excellent. For a man who had gone through chaos all day, this was a rare victory. Once dinner settled the mood, Alice returned to the subject that mattered most to Jack, going back to his world. She explained that repatriation magic was not impossible. That alone was valuable news, but it was extremely difficult. To make it work, they would need to study the original summoning spell, gather materials, prepare research tools, and perform proper testing. In short, it would require resources far beyond one person. Alice then gave the clearest example possible. They would need the support of a country. Jack listened carefully. It matched what he had already learned on the road. Returning home would require summoning magic or repatriation magic, both tied to space-related powers. Those arts were rare, powerful, and heavily controlled. Countries kept the methods, formulas, and magic circles secret. No normal person could simply ask for access. Still, Alice had not said it was hopeless. She had said it was possible. That single detail stayed with him. If all he needed were equipment and materials, maybe there was another path. Jack then considered the obvious option, working for a nation as some kind of mercenary. However, even that sounded troublesome. There was no guarantee they would keep their promises. His identity could not be hidden either, since his status board exposed everything. And more than anything, he hated being tied down by rules and control. Now that he knew his trump card was the ability to destroy a city's core, dangerous thoughts naturally followed. If every country had the same weak point, temptation would always be there. For someone with the class name Bomber, that was a serious problem. Alice noticed the weight on his face and asked what was bothering him. She quickly guessed the issue. Perhaps he did not like the idea of serving under a country. Jack gave a careful answer. It depended. Their conversation was suddenly interrupted by a noise coming from outside. Jack immediately turned his attention toward it, wondering what had happened. Alice calmly moved to the window and checked the front gate. She quickly understood the cause. Something had triggered the spell placed on the entrance. It was a defense system she had installed to keep intruders away. Anyone unwanted who touched the gate would be met with enough force to stop them. Alice then reminded Jack of something interesting. He had passed through that same gate earlier without any real trouble. That made Jack remember the moment clearly. When he first opened it, he had felt something like static electricity run through him. At the time, he brushed it off. But now, hearing the explanation, he realized that had been the trap activating. And yes, it had hurt more than he first admitted. Alice explained that she designed the spell to be strong enough to knock most people unconscious. However, against someone with a high level, it would not be enough. She then noted that the man outside seemed completely fine as well. Alice noticed his unusual clothing and casually asked Jack if the man was a friend of his. Jack rejected that idea immediately. Then he took a closer look and recognized the face. It was one of the summoned people from the capital. More specifically, one of the same men who had looked down on him before. Jack found the reunion almost amusing. A very familiar face had arrived at the worst possible time. But one question stood above the rest. How had this man survived the destruction of the capital? The visitor, on the other hand, had no interest in explaining himself. He shouted at Jack with clear anger and demanded that he come down immediately. Jack decided to excuse himself from dinner and head outside. It seemed he suddenly had something important to deal with. Before Jack stepped outside, Alice warned him to be careful. Jack looked at her, and she explained that the man waiting outside might be dangerous. Furious rage surrounded him, as if he had been carrying an immense hatred toward Jack for a long time. Jack accepted the warning and told her he would be careful. However, he reminded her that he still had a few more questions, so she should not disappear anywhere. Alice calmly assured him that she would remain there. As Jack prepared his guns, he quickly understood that this meeting would not turn into any kind of friendly talk. What he doesn't know yet is how troublesome it may become, especially with the few rounds he had left. Jack stepped forward and greeted the man. In response, the man immediately drew his sword. Jack looked him over and noted that he seemed completely fine, even though Jack had assumed he would have been ashes by now. The man revealed that he had been searching for Jack. He could hardly believe he had found him in the very first town. Then he accused Jack of being the one who blew up the imperial capital. Jack casually admitted it. To him, those fools had crossed the line, and they simply received what was coming to them. The man answered that he already knew it. In his eyes, those were unforgivable evil acts. Meanwhile, Jack moved toward the gates, though he first tested them carefully for any static electricity. Even in tense moments, his habit stayed the same. The swordsman demanded to know if Jack even understood how many people had died because of those actions. Jack dismissed the question at once. Numbers meant nothing to him, and he saw no connection between their deaths and himself. The man pressed harder, asking whether Jack felt even the smallest remorse. Jack answered with the same cold ease as always. If he had known remorse, he would never have become known as the bomber. Ever since the previous world, Jack had carried that name and the fear that came with it. Long ago, he had already lost count of how many lives were taken by the bombs he set off. If he stopped to feel guilt for every explosion, then there would have been no reason for him to live as a mercenary. But then, after brushing aside all of that, Jack focused on the stranger once more. What truly bothered him was something else entirely. He could not understand how this man was still alive. Jack coldly pointed out that the explosion had brought the city down in a single blink. Even now, he could barely believe the man was still standing after that. The man revealed that he survived because of the skill he possessed. He explained that every other reincarnated person had also lived through it by relying on their own powers. Jack was not the only one blessed in this world. And even if those reincarnated people refused to work together openly, the man knew for certain that all of them were secretly planning to take Jack down. Hearing that, Jack realized those fools who once mocked him were still alive because of those absurd cheat-like powers. However, that only amused him. He had always preferred to hunt down his targets personally, and if he did not blow them up himself, he would never feel satisfied. Jack admitted that the news sounded so exciting it might actually keep him awake at night. The man only grew more furious. Then Jack casually asked why he would reveal all of that in advance. In Jack's eyes, the man had thrown away the element of surprise for nothing. The swordsman declared that he spoke only to plant despair inside Jack. He wanted Jack to regret everything he had done. On top of that, a dead man had no need to worry about learning one or two extra things. Jack understood the confidence behind those words. However, he mocked the man for clinging to revenge instead of living one more peaceful day. Then he invited him forward, promising to blow him into pieces. That was enough. The man rushed ahead in rage, sword ready to strike. As he charged, he declared that he would continue his duty as the hero of the imperial capital. After that, he would return to his original world and live there without worry. But then, beneath that bold charge, his true thoughts surfaced. He believed himself to be someone who never got caught in trouble. Those who fell into trouble were pathetic in his eyes. Because of that belief, he always watched everything carefully before acting. Through that way of living, he convinced himself that the world was filled with failures, while he alone knew how to avoid disaster through elementary school, high school, and work. Min-ida remembered the moment from his old world when his boss grabbed him by the collar and demanded the truth about company's secrets being sold outside. Min-ida admitted it without shame. To him, the real issue was that among all his co-workers, he was the only one who had not received a raise. That was what he considered absurd. His boss then brought up the leaked personal information of employees, unable to understand how far Min-ida had gone. Min-ida refused all blame. In his eyes, everyone else had failed to recognize his value. He cursed them again and again, insisting he had done nothing wrong and that everything was their fault. Then came the strange light rising from the ground in answer to his desperate cries. He accepted it as proof that he had been right all along. To him, it was a second chance to reclaim his honor and the life he believed he deserved. And now, standing before Jack, Min-ida believed that everything had changed because of him. As Min-ida rushed in with his attack, Jack suddenly told him to hold up and forced the charge to stop for a moment. Even in the middle of danger, Jack wanted one thing first. He wanted the man's name. Min-ida could not understand why that would matter. However, Jack explained that building a grave would be a pain if he did not know whose name belonged on it. The moment he finished, Jack fired 3 shots straight at him. Min-ida instantly stopped the bullets in midair. Then he turned them around and sent them back toward Jack. Jack quickly dodged the first returning shot, but then the other 2 bullets followed right after him. Even so, Jack moved again and avoided those as well. At once, Jack understood what had happened. Min-ida had not merely blocked the bullets, he had reflected them. Jack admitted that the magic was interesting and demanded to know what kind of ridiculous power it was. Min-ida proudly revealed the name of his skill, Perfect Reflection A+. Any damage aimed at him would be doubled and sent back at the attacker. That was how he had survived the explosion at the imperial capital. In his eyes, anything Jack threw at him would be useless. As long as he possessed that skill, he believed himself undefeated. Then Min-ida decided to share his name after all, claiming Jack could carry it down with him and warn hell itself. He introduced himself as Min-ida Kuji, then raised his sword toward Jack. Jack calmly repeated the name in his mind and even thanked him for giving it. But then, without delay, he pulled out a knife and drove it toward Min-ida's neck. As expected, the blade was instantly deflected and dropped aside. Jack moved again and drew his gun. He fired once more, yet the bullet bounced away just like before. Min-ida immediately countered with a sword strike, but Jack slipped aside and avoided it. Jack answered with a kick aimed at Min-ida's face. However, the invisible barrier reflected the blow and pushed it away. Jack quickly stepped backward, creating distance. Then he raised his gun, aimed carefully, and pulled the trigger. Nothing happened. Min-ida realized at once that Jack had run out of bullets. Seeing his chance, he lunged forward and swung his sword again. But even then, Jack jumped backward in time and narrowly avoided the strike. Min-ida confidently told Jack that he surely should have noticed by now. No matter what he tried, everything was pointless against him. While Min-ida kept talking, Jack only stared back with a cold and serious face. Then Jack casually asked one simple question: what level Min-ida was. Min-ida answered proudly that he was level 80, and because of that he possessed strength far beyond normal people. Jack then revealed his own level. It was 385. The number struck Min-ida at once. He stepped back in disbelief and called Jack a liar. However, Jack calmly told him he was not joking at all. He had simply gathered a huge amount of experience points. That answer shook Min-ida more than he wanted to admit. Fear began to rise inside him, but he quickly covered it with forced confidence. To him, a higher level only meant more power to reflect back. The stronger Jack was, the better it would be for Min-ida. Meanwhile, Jack judged the situation clearly. Careless attacks against Min-ida would be suicide. However, Jack also saw something useful. Min-ida was a complete beginner in real combat. Even if their levels were equal, Jack still had no interest in being sliced in half. What he doesn't know yet is how Jack had already started finding the answer. Frustrated, Min-ida demanded to know why Jack would not just give up. In his eyes, escape was useless, and victory was impossible. Jack should simply accept the end waiting for him. Jack, however, only mocked the speech and asked if they could finish already, since people were waiting. That irritated Min-ida even more. He could not understand how Jack could still joke in a moment like this. As far as Min-ida believed, there was no chance left for Jack to turn anything around. Jack gave a short answer and prepared himself. Then he warned Min-ida never to believe himself unbeatable. Arrogance only led to destruction. In the next instant, Jack dashed forward. He grabbed Min-ida by the face and controlled his whole body at once. Then he asked Min-ida how that felt up close. Min-ida froze in confusion for a second. That was all Jack needed. He slipped behind him and locked himself into a chokehold position. Jack secured the hold tightly and explained that he would finish this painlessly. This was how he planned to bypass Perfect Reflection A+. By restricting Min-ida's movement with only light contact and pinning him down, there would be no damage dealt at all. And without damage, there would be nothing to reflect. Minita struggled wildly, trying to break free and reach the sword lying nearby. However, Jack kept the hold tight and joked that Minita should consider it a hug from one of his fans. Then Jack pulled out a small explosive. He treated it like a gift, calling it a nice souvenir from the castle, before forcing it into Minita's mouth. Jack flicked out his lighter, lit the fuse, and made sure Minita swallowed it. Jack calmly explained that the cracker itself had weak firepower. On its own, it would not even leave a dent. However, Minita's reflected damage was supposed to double every attack. Jack pointed out the problem immediately. The first blast might be weak, but once it kept doubling again and again, the result would be obvious. Worse still, the explosion was happening inside Minita's mouth and body, where there was nowhere for the force to escape. It would continue bouncing back endlessly. Jack still covered Minita's mouth and told him they would now see how long he could endure it. Fear spread across Minita's face. He could not escape Jack's grip, and for the first time, his confidence was gone. Then the explosive went off inside him. Jack complained that it was annoying the blast had already moved down into Minita's stomach. A second explosion followed right after. Jack casually asked whether Minita wanted to be saved. Then he suggested that forgiveness and friendship would have been the better choice. From the distance, people nearby heard the strange sounds and wondered what was happening. Jack still held Minita's mouth shut. Then he suddenly stood up and declared that, to celebrate their newly formed friendship, they should play ball. In this game, Minita would be the ball. Jack then hurled him high into the air. A moment later, Minita exploded midair. Pieces of his body scattered across the sky. Below, Jack stood there celebrating wildly, praising the astonishing trick shot that made the ball disappear. He even complained that such a performance could only be enjoyed once. The people nearby were horrified by what they had seen. Shocked and frightened, they immediately ran away. Jack looked at the fleeing crowd and mocked them for showing up to watch, only to panic and cause a scene afterward. He thought they should have shown more decency. Back inside Alice's house, Jack returned and apologized for making her wait so long. Alice welcomed him back at once, but noticed he was injured and asked if he was all right. Jack gave a light laugh and brushed it off, saying he only needed a drink and some sleep. Alice apologized because there was no alcohol in the house. Jack looked disappointed for a moment, but quickly said it was fine and that he would go get some himself. However, before he could head in properly, Alice pointed out one last thing. He needed to wash all that blood off first. Later, Jack took a shower, and once he was done, Alice told him to make himself at home. Jack thanked her for the hospitality. However, he admitted he was not sure he had the luxury of relaxing with a bath after everything that had happened. He then asked if she was truly fine with keeping him there after the incident outside. The people of the town avoided even speaking of the witch, and none of them dared to get on her bad side. What had happened earlier would only deepen their fear. Alice remained calm and welcomed him again, telling him that if he had nowhere to stay, her humble mansion was open to him. Jack quickly compared it to sleeping in an abandoned house in the slums. This was clearly far better, and refusing such an offer would be foolish. However, something about it bothered him. Alice seemed a little too kind. She was the alchemist known through rumors, yet the truth behind those rumors was still unclear. There was also something about her behavior that felt strangely distant from the world around her. Jack did not believe she was helping him out of simple kindness. He knew very well that he was not the kind of man people naturally liked. So did Jack. There had to be another reason. And if that was true, then he needed to stay careful. But then, while he was still in the bathroom, he sensed someone outside. His suspicion immediately turned toward Alice. Still, even he doubted she would stoop so low as to ambush him in the shower. He stood up at once and pulled the curtain aside. What he found was not danger, but Alice's servants carrying his clothes. Jack instantly raised his guard and demanded to know what they were doing. The servants panicked and ran off immediately. When Jack looked at the neatly folded clothes they had left behind, he realized they had been washed and dried perfectly. He could only admit to himself that Alice was incredibly attentive. In its own way, that made her a force to be reckoned with. Later, Jack thanked Alice for cleaning the blood and mud from his clothes. She simply accepted it. Alice then noticed that Jack's wounds had already healed. Jack agreed. Quietly, he also realized that even the soreness in his limbs was gone. It was likely because of his high level, which had raised his recovery speed. For Jack, that was a welcome change. Alice noted that healing would not be necessary after all. Then she led him toward the guest room. Once inside, she told him to use it freely and rest. Jack agreed at once, noticing that the bed looked dangerously comfortable. Alice then asked what she should call him. Jack told her either Jack or Aaron would do, depending on the situation, and that he did not mind either way. Alice decided to call him Jack. With the same calm face as always, Alice told him that she liked his strong spirit. Jack laughed and pointed out that most people would simply call that being insensitive or arrogant. However, Alice said Jack might not realize it, but he was a very rare specimen. From the moment she first saw him, her interest had been stirred, and that was why she invited him into her mansion. Jack stared at her for a moment. Then he lowered himself slightly toward her and teased her with the idea that this might be love at first sight. Jack remarked that living as a handsome man like himself was truly a burden. However, Alice calmly answered that she liked people who were mad in the way Jack was. To her, there was always something entertaining about gazing into the filth hidden inside his soul. Jack admitted that was not exactly praise anyone should be proud of, but he decided to accept it as a compliment anyway. Then her words about his soul made him remember something else. Earlier, Alice had spoken of the man he had just killed, the one carrying immense hatred toward him. Jack wondered if she had truly seen through that feeling. Alice explained that it was only to a small extent. She could see the hues of emotions and spirits, but it was nothing close to reading minds. Jack considered the idea of hues and colors tied to feelings, then noted that it sounded like a very useful power. With the matter settled, Alice said it was getting late and prepared to leave. She wished him a good night, and Jack returned the same farewell. Morning arrived, yet Jack was still asleep. Alice entered his room and simply stood there, quietly staring at his face. Then Jack opened his eyes and rose from the bed. He greeted her, and she calmly returned the greeting. Alice informed him that breakfast was ready and invited him to dine. Jack followed, though part of him still wondered if she had some other plan in mind. If she did, he believed she would have revealed it by now. Jack hated being used by others. However, when someone treated him fairly, he preferred to repay that kindness if it was within his power. While they ate, Alice asked how the food was that morning. Jack answered that it was very good. In truth, he found it delicious. If there were a restaurant serving meals like this, he would have become a regular customer without question. Alice then revealed that she had made the seasoning stronger because Jack did not seem fully satisfied the day before. Jack quietly realized she was right. Last night's dinner had been excellent, but just a little bland. He had not expected her to notice something that small. He admitted he could not believe he had let that show on his face and apologized. However, Alice smoothly changed the topic and asked what he planned to do from now on. Jack answered that he intended to return to his own world. But before that, there was one more matter he wanted to handle. He planned to kill the fools who had been summoned with him. Now that he knew he had failed to finish them the first time, he assumed they were already planning revenge. To Jack, the answer was simple. The roots of the problem had to be cut out completely. Alice reacted by saying that sounded like a difficult path ahead. Even so, she told Jack that she would be cheering for him. However, her curiosity quickly turned elsewhere. She asked if, after the meal, she could see more of Jack's skill for herself, how his bombs were made, how they worked, and what they could create. Her interest was clearly high. Jack agreed without much hesitation and told her to gather the materials. If she did, he would show her everything himself. Alice looked at him with quiet confidence and calmly told him to follow her. Later, they entered a storage room. Alice explained that this was the place where she brewed her potions. It also contained explosive materials. Jack looked around carefully, studying every shelf and container in silence. However, inside his mind, one problem appeared immediately. He could read the labels, but reading the words did not mean he understood what any of them truly were. Alice then presented a bottle filled with magic liquid. She explained that it was made from mana and was necessary for crafting magic tools and fueling vehicles. The purer it was, the more expensive it became. Next, she showed another bottle. This one contained processed bodily fluids taken from a magic beast. Even slight contact with it could cause severe burns. Then she revealed a vegetable liquid. It was highly flammable and often used for brewing wine. However, drinking it in that raw form would be a terrible idea. Jack casually remarked that it sounded like the perfect plan for a Friday night. As Alice continued explaining the uses and effects of each item, Jack quickly realized that some of them could absolutely be turned into bomb materials. Alice then began giving direct instructions. Mix these in this amount, bottle it up, attach a fuse, cool it down, let it harden, and it would be complete. She added that the process was quite difficult, which made it perfect for testing Jack's skill. Jack simply asked if all he needed to do was craft it. But then, in the next moment, Jack's expression changed. Confusion crossed his face. Alice noticed it immediately and asked what was wrong. Jack questioned whether the mixing ratio was incorrect. Alice firmly denied it at once. She reminded him that she was an alchemist, so he only needed to trust her and continue the work. Jack agreed at once and told her not to mind if he did. Then he began working with the calm confidence of a man handling his true specialty. Only 5 minutes later, Jack had already produced a magic bomb rank D, carrying a power value of 1000. Both Alice and Jack stared at the finished result. From Jack's view, it was not bad at all. In fact, he considered it better than the firecracker from earlier. Of course, it could not compare to the city core explosion, but that kind of power was a massive exception to begin with. Alice picked one up and studied it closely. She examined it in silence for nearly a full minute. Then she looked back at Jack and declared the magic bomb astonishing. Even with an improper mixing ratio, he had still managed to create it successfully. Jack immediately asked what she meant by that. Alice then revealed the truth. The recipe she gave him was one no person had ever succeeded in following. Yet Jack had completed it 3 times. To her, that was simply impossible. At that moment, Jack understood everything. No wonder he had felt something was wrong from the start. Alice had deliberately handed him a terrible recipe that was doomed to fail, all for the sake of testing his skill. Jack then asked if she was satisfied now that his power could guarantee success in bomb making. He added that this should settle the matter. Whatever else could be said, the usefulness of that skill was unmatched. Alice fell silent for a moment. She seemed to gather courage before speaking again. Then she softly called out to Jack with an unusually shy tone. She said there was something she wanted to ask of him. Jack asked what it was and casually told her not to be shy. To Jack, this finally felt like the real reason for everything. The true main course had arrived. Then Alice revealed her wish. She wanted to destroy this world. And with calm sincerity, she asked Jack if he would be kind enough to lend her a hand. Jack took the request lightly at first. He told Alice to wait a moment and asked her to repeat what she had just said, just to make sure he had heard it correctly. Alice calmly repeated herself. She wanted to destroy this world, and to do that, she needed Jack to lend her his strength. Jack immediately focused on that part. Lending his strength was no small matter. Before giving any answer, he told Alice to explain the full details of that wish first. Alice agreed without resistance and suggested they discuss it over tea. Later, while the tea was served, Alice began telling an old story. Long ago, there had been a certain dark mage. She was a woman with an enormous ambition. However, time took her away before that dream could ever be completed. That dark mage had despised the limits placed on mortals. Because of that disgust, she created a forbidden technique. It was a spell that could pass power and knowledge into the next life, rejecting the idea that death was the true end. To her, death was only another milestone. Jack listened with open amazement and praised the scale of that madness. To him, only someone truly obsessed would dive into forbidden magic for a dream that large. He even assumed such a person must have become some kind of monster by now. However, Alice calmly corrected him. The truth was the complete opposite. The dark mage had been stubborn about remaining human. She could have gained immortality and lived forever, yet she refused that path. Her wish had always been to reach her goal as nothing more than a human being. The mention of immortality immediately caught Jack's interest. Following the flow of the story, he made a quick guess. He concluded that Alice herself was the reincarnation of that dark mage. Alice confirmed that he was correct. She then explained the truth more carefully. She was the next life of the dark mage, but not the same person in the purest sense. Though she had inherited the dark mage's power and will, Alice herself was mentally a completely different being. Jack asked Alice if that meant the dark mage was practically dead in terms of ego. Alice calmly confirmed it. She explained that the dark mage had understood her own mediocrity. She feared that if her ego remained intact, she would never continue to grow. Because of that, she never intended to preserve herself as she was. Instead, she believed that spontaneous and irregular growth was the true force behind evolution. That was why the very first dark mage chose to live again and again, gathering countless experiences through each life. Alice then revealed that she was now the 13th life in that chain. From the second life came alchemy techniques. From the 6th came golem magic. From the 9th came the craft of making magic tools. And from the 13th came spiritual sensation. Jack quickly understood the meaning behind it. With every new life, Alice would only become stronger. To him, that plan required absurd patience, fierce willpower, and a mind that never stopped moving. And at the end of all that effort stood one final goal: to destroy the world. Alice answered that she was not a genius at all. In her view, everything had simply been handed down from one life to the next. She brushed that point aside as unimportant. Then she spoke firmly once more. She wanted to destroy the world because her true aim was to become the greatest alchemist ever. Jack was genuinely confused and asked what destroying the world had to do with any of that. To Alice, the answer was simple. World domination would be the greatest achievement possible. No one had ever done it before. If she succeeded, then she alone would deserve to be crowned the ultimate existence. And once the world was left in ruins, no one new would be born to surpass her. For ages, for centuries, for endless time to come, Alice alone would remain the greatest. She then explained that this had been the wish of the first dark mage from the very beginning. Jack finally understood the full story. Everything about Alice now made sense. He concluded that Alice truly belonged among the ranks of mad scientists. He had already known she was no normal girl. However, the truth was far worse. She was a far more dangerous monster than he had first imagined. Alice suddenly fell silent. Sadness crossed her face as she called herself disgusting. Jack rejected that idea immediately. Instead, he told her that the determination she carried toward her purpose was something amazing. He made it clear that he was not joking. He truly respected her resolve. To Jack, pushing forward at the expense of others was not evil. In his eyes, the world always judged by results. If someone beat a person down and that person stayed there, they would be remembered as the villain. However, from another angle, if someone removed every obstacle and reached their dream, that same person would be praised as righteous. That was how Jack believed the world worked. The strong devoured the weak, and only those with power were free to walk as they pleased. Alice thanked him for those words. She admitted that it was not every day someone truly understood her. Then Alice rose to her feet and calmly laid out what she could offer. She possessed vast knowledge and many talents. She could prepare equipment for bomb making, provide magic knowledge, and support Jack in many ways. More than that, she promised to make sure Jack could return to his own world. And in exchange, Jack needed to help her destroy this one. Jack asked if what she meant was that he should simply plant a bomb large enough to blow up the world itself. Alice confirmed it without hesitation. Jack's bomb-making skill was a crucial key to her plan. To her, Jack was a chance too valuable to let slip away. The same power that destroyed the imperial capital was the power she wanted him to lend. Then she extended her hand toward him. Jack paused and considered it. Destroying the world was far beyond his usual line of work. However, it was certainly interesting. On top of that, having a local guide who knew the world well would be incredibly useful. So Jack accepted. He extended his hand, took Alice's, and the two shook hands in agreement. Jack admitted he was glad to be working with someone like her. With Alice beside him, his life in this world would definitely stay interesting. Alice said she was glad as well. From now on, they would help each other. Jack agreed and said it was time to move toward their goals. For Jack, as long as he returned home, everything else could happen as it pleased. Alice might be a lunatic, but she was a genius one. Her goal did not interfere with his own. And deep down, Jack could already feel it. Things were about to become very fun. The craziest duo had just been born. Later, preparations for war had already begun in their own strange way. Jack asked Alice if he could use the mixing room. Even if the coming fight was for her goal or his own, he would feel far safer with a weapon in hand. Alice agreed at once. She told him to freely use the room and all the materials inside. In her eyes, she had already carefully examined Jack's skill. What remained now was finding the method that could destroy the world itself. She then told Jack that she would be downstairs. If he needed anything, he only had to call for her. Once she left, Jack quietly reflected on her words. She was seriously working out a way to end the world. However, what mattered more to him was keeping a close eye on Alice. He needed to escape this world before she ever succeeded. Jack knew one thing clearly. If Alice ever discovered a way to destroy the world without needing his bombs, she would betray him without hesitation. She had already spent 13 lives chasing that goal. That kind of persistence was on another level entirely. Compared to someone like Alice, Jack almost felt like a harmless little bomber. He placed his empty gun and broken knife on the table, but the sight only made him uneasy. When he had been transported here, he had left his weapon bag behind. Most of his ammunition had been inside it. Still, Jack saw no point in crying over spilled milk. He chose to think positively. Compared to being thrown into the snow with nothing but underwear, this situation was far better. That had truly been miserable. By that standard, staying here was almost comfortable. He had clothes, food, a roof over his head, and even a room made for bomb crafting. On top of that, thanks to bomb making EX++, even strange materials from this world could become useful if Jack was the one handling them. After some time, Jack successfully created a makeshift tear gas bomb. The quality would always depend on the materials and the process. However, success itself was guaranteed. And more importantly, Jack was now free to experiment with every strange material he could find in this world. After some time of deep work, Jack finally stretched his body. He had just finished making 30 different kinds of explosives in a row. To him, it was nothing special, but it was honest work. Still, another idea had started growing in his mind. He wanted to try crafting a magic bomb. If enemies from both this world and his original one were waiting for him, then using magic would be a huge advantage. He once had a mage help improve the city core, so this time he figured Alice could lend him her knowledge for something closer to science. When Jack headed downstairs to call for Alice, he glanced out the window and froze. Outside the mansion stood an army. The sight caught him completely off guard. Jack had no idea what was happening, so he immediately asked Alice if invitations had somehow been sent out. Alice calmly replied that the army had simply arrived. Jack pressed her for what she knew. Alice explained that she was a clean, tax-paying citizen of the town. There were rumors about her, yes, but officially she was only seen as an artisan. Because of that, her best guess was simple. They had come for Jack. Jack could only react with disbelief. He pointed out that he was an honest, God-fearing man and felt he deserved at least one break in life. Outside, The general raised his voice and issued a warning to the bomber hiding inside. Jack was ordered to surrender immediately. The demand was repeated again. If Jack resisted, his life would be in danger. Alice looked toward Jack. He answered with a fake smile. Then he quietly decided to head back upstairs and collect the explosives he had just made. If that was how things were going, then so be it. Or was. Jack grew irritated the moment they threatened his life. In his eyes, he should have been the one making threats. He moved to rush outside at once, but Alice grabbed him and stopped him in place. She told him to calm down. Killing an entire army would take time. Her advice was simple: they needed to leave immediately. Jack argued that even if they escaped, the army would never leave them alone. If there was no better way to clear a path, then he would simply kill them all. Alice then mentioned transportation and told Jack to follow her. Later, they stood before a hidden door. Alice calmly revealed that this would be the first time she had ever shown anyone the room beyond it. When Alice opened the hidden room, only darkness waited inside. The place was completely pitch black. Jack immediately remarked that now it made sense why it was so dark in there. But then, a light suddenly came alive. As the room brightened, Jack saw what had been hidden within it, and stopped in shock. A car stood inside. He stared at it in disbelief and demanded to know what it was. Alice calmly explained that it was a special vehicle created through the combined function of 10 golems. In every practical sense, it was superior to a horse. She added that she had prepared it for the day she would eventually travel. However, it seemed that day had arrived sooner than expected. Jack reacted with open delight. To him, the only word for it was perfect. He was genuinely happy to be working with a genius like Alice. Alice dismissed the praise and insisted she was no genius, only a successor carrying what came before. Jack refused to accept that modesty and told her to stop hiding behind it. In his eyes, Alice was clearly great. Alice looked at him for a quiet moment, taking in those words. Meanwhile, Jack continued admiring the elegant form of the vehicle before him. Alice then told Jack that he was a good man. Jack answered with zero humility, claiming he already knew that, especially when it came to women. He quickly shifted back to business and declared it was time to pack Alice's things, load them onto the ride, and give the soldiers outside something to remember. In Jack's eyes, what was the point of having a machine like this if no one got to witness it? Outside, chaos was already spreading. Some soldiers were being caught in traps around the mansion. Others were getting struck by bursts of static electricity. The general grew furious and scolded his men, calling them fools for failing to deal with one simple mansion. To him, this was supposed to be nothing more than an alchemist's house. However, one soldier quickly corrected that idea. This was not merely a house. It was practically a witch's hut. Another soldier admitted he could not believe Jack had chosen to seek shelter there. But then, before anyone could say more, the ground behind them began to rumble. Then golems rose from the ground and immediately charged into the soldiers' formation. They tore through the lines and began destroying the lane where the army stood. Inside the house, Jack and Alice could hear the general shouting in frustration, ordering his men to destroy the golems at once. Jack let out a chuckle and admitted those golems were incredibly useful. However, Alice calmly pointed out that the army's numbers were too great. She did not believe the golems could hold them back for long. Then she handed Jack the key to the car. The two climbed inside, and Jack brought the engine to life. The sound alone caught his full attention. It was sharp, clean, and deeply satisfying. To Jack, it was the kind of sound a man could love instantly. Alice asked if he was truly planning not to use the autopilot. Jack answered with full confidence. He had no need for it. He trusted his own driving skill and told Alice to simply watch as he smashed through the crowd waiting outside. Alice admitted she felt strangely nervous. It was not fear, but something harder to describe. Before she could finish the thought, Jack lightly brushed it aside by treating the moment like a car date, claiming that naturally he felt nervous too. Alice then told Jack that she would open the wall in front of them and instructed him to be ready. Jack agreed at once. She began an incantation, and light gathered around her hands. Outside, the soldiers suddenly witnessed the mansion wall opening before their eyes. The sight left them confused and stunned. From inside the car, Jack grew openly excited. To him, the fun drive had finally begun. He declared that the show was starting and warned Alice not to bite her own tongue. Alice silently braced herself. Then the car burst through the open wall and launched outward. It came crashing down onto the soldiers below, crushing them on impact. Jack casually remarked that he had been worried about the lack of seatbelts or airbags. However, it turned out there was a convenient cushion waiting directly underneath him. Alice, unfamiliar with those strange words, could only look confused. Without slowing down for even a second, Jack drove straight into the soldiers blocking their path. In his mind, there was only one plan now: slam through everything and drive all the way out of the city. Ahead of them stood the general with more soldiers beside him. However, the car showed no sign of stopping. The general tried to command them to halt and reminded Jack that destroying the imperial capital was a crime deserving punishment. Jack gave the speech no value at all. He dismissed it instantly. With the speed of the vehicle, the general had no chance to move aside. The car struck him head-on. Blood splashed across the front as his body was left horribly broken. Alice then pointed out that their view had been blocked. Jack switched on the wiper, but it did little to clear the blood from the glass. Even so, they continued forward without slowing. Behind them, soldiers shouted for the pair not to escape and ordered the others to stop them. Jack remained completely calm. He said he could still see the road just fine and treated the blood on the glass like decoration. Alice quietly responded that she would remember to improve the car later. And just like that, they departed the city with fresh blood marking the start of their journey. One of the soldiers quickly ordered the others to contact nearby troops. Another commanded the mages to target the wheels of the escaping car. However, no matter what they tried, nothing was working. Jack laughed loudly as he drove, fully impressed by the machine beneath him. To him, this car was a beautiful monster. Bullets and magic could not even begin to compare with it. Alice calmly explained that it was not completely indestructible. However, its armor was built from 10 golems, each one as hard as a wall. On top of that, the entire body was coated with a magic-resistant spell. For Jack, that only made it cooler. Then Alice suddenly remembered something important. She reached over and turned on a music player. At once, a loud and powerful song filled the car, perfectly suited for their wild road trip. Jack recognized it immediately as hard rock. He was surprised that Alice had installed a music player at all. Alice explained that it worked through a special kind of magic that used melodies as formulas. She added that the fifth life had been a musician and likely loved this kind of genre. Alice herself was not much of a fan. Even so, she admitted the benefits were useful. The song could improve dynamic vision and raise excitement. It had also been noted as an effective way to boost team morale. Jack understood immediately. He looked around at the strange mix surrounding him: medieval scenery, guns, magic, a golem car, and now hard rock music. It honestly made him wonder what this world did not have. But then Alice glanced toward the side window and noticed pursuers closing in. Several men were riding machines behind them. Those men were armed as well. Jack quickly realized they wanted to drive and shoot at the same time. In his eyes, they clearly knew how to play this kind of game. However, he had no intention of letting them enjoy it. Jack immediately pulled out one of his explosives and handed the task to Alice, telling her to light it. Once it was ready, he threw it outside. This bomb was not made to cause damage. Its purpose was smoke. However, that smoke carried several strong stimulants similar to chili peppers. It was the kind of tool made to blind enemies, choke them, and leave them unable to move. After the riders were hit by the smoke, Jack laughed and assumed none of them would be recovering anytime soon. However, one determined rider managed to break through the cloud. He charged forward, ordered Jack to stop, and fired a gun toward the car. Jack answered by ramming the vehicle straight into him. The pursuer was wiped out instantly. Jack then realized that if they kept dealing with enemies one by one, they would be stuck there all day. To him, it was time to find a proper exit from the city. Alice calmly informed him that the city gate was on the opposite side. Jack was stunned. That news turned the situation into a real problem. He quickly judged that there was no time to fully turn around. His best option seemed to be pushing the gas harder and searching for narrow turns along the way. But then Alice placed both hands on the surface of the car. In the next moment, the upper half of the vehicle suddenly lifted and spun around. Jack had no idea what was happening. When everything settled, the car was facing the opposite direction. Jack immediately asked what she had just done. Alice explained that she simply commanded the golem body of the car to rotate its upper half. To her, spinning the entire machine would have been far more troublesome. Then she calmly told Jack to drive straight ahead. Jack could only stare at her in confusion. He then asked her to warn him next time, since sudden surprises were not his favorite thing. Alice gave a slight smile. She admitted that the trip had become quite thrilling. Jack replied that he was glad she had managed to enjoy something from all of this chaos. As for Jack, the whole thing was ethically a disaster. Personally, he did not care in the slightest. After a brief silence, Alice asked whether he liked the car. Jack answered with full enthusiasm. He absolutely did. In fact, he was already thinking that in his next letter to Santa Claus, he would ask to bring this machine back to his old world. Alice was quietly pleased to hear that. Alice said she believed the car could still be improved. She then told Jack to give her detailed suggestions later. Jack agreed immediately. He was already excited, because he could barely imagine what this machine would become after upgrades. But then, waiting ahead of them, a barricade blocked the road. Soldiers stood behind it, armed and ready to fire. Jack recognized the setup at once. In his eyes, it was a weak barricade that would never truly stop anything. He decided he would simply ram straight through it and told Alice to hold on tight. However, Alice calmly told him to leave it to her instead. She placed her hands on the surface of the car once more. Jack asked what she was planning. Alice explained that she would reshape it into the perfect form for breaking through. As she cast her spell, the engine growled louder. Jack waited for something to happen. Then, after a few moments, the car transformed into something far more dangerous. A sharp spear-like shape formed at the front of the vehicle. Jack was instantly thrilled by the sight. To him, the car had just become much scarier. Alice then asked if this form seemed more suitable for driving through flesh. Jack fully agreed. This was exactly the kind of improvement he had in mind. Satisfied, he pushed the speed even higher and aimed straight for the barricade. As they rushed closer, the soldiers opened fire. However, the bullets could not stop the charging machine. The commander urgently ordered everyone to fall back and move aside. But it was already too late. The car crashed through them without mercy. Jack reached out and grabbed one of the soldiers. He casually asked if the man was hurt anywhere. The soldier could only stare in confusion. Jack calmly let him know there was no need for thanks, since he only needed the man for a short conversation. Then Jack shifted his attention to the soldier's gun and made it clear that he wanted it, along with a bullet if possible. Jack admitted that at this rate, he would soon run out of firepower. Desperate to survive, the soldier handed over the weapon and pleaded for mercy. Jack thanked him warmly and said he owed him a big favor. Then, without hesitation, he tossed the soldier aside. Jack proudly showed the gun to Alice and called it a fine souvenir. He added that the people of this world were incredibly kind, saying he was deeply moved by their hostility. Alice noted that Jack was truly a joker. Jack answered by claiming he had never been a serious man to begin with. Then the city gate came into view. Alice pointed it out at once, though she also noticed it had been shut tightly. Jack was confident they could simply pierce straight through it. But then, another sound cut through the road. Hooves were rapidly approaching from behind. A lone rider was closing in fast. Jack wondered if it was a knight. The killing intent coming from that figure was sharp and clear, completely different from the ordinary guards. Jack immediately judged that this one would be troublesome. Alice explained that the rider on horseback was the captain of the knights in this city, a famous hero of the kingdom and a wielder of a magic sword. Clearly, this was no ordinary opponent. She was about to give the man's name and full introduction. However, Jack cut that off immediately. He had no interest in hearing a grand speech or learning titles. Alice asked why it did not matter. Jack answered in the only way he knew. He pulled out 3 explosives, calm and confident, then made it clear that names were pointless when the man would be buried within 5 minutes. He hurled the first explosive directly at the charging knight. However, the rider broke through the blast without slowing. Jack quickly followed with 2 more bombs, yet once again the knight passed through the explosions. Jack had to admit it was impressive. He remarked that instead of a knight, the rider would be better suited as a jockey. Then he noticed the mount beneath the rider. It was no normal horse. Alice explained that the creature was a monster whose distant cousins were dragons. It was far stronger and faster than ordinary horses. Even with the car, they would not be able to lose it. Jack immediately reminded Alice that she was the one who built the car and asked if she felt disappointed by that fact. Alice admitted she felt a little disappointed. The knight drew closer and closer to the vehicle. The rider locked eyes with Jack, and Jack casually returned a look. He greeted the knight lightly and even suggested going for a ride together. The knight had no patience for that nonsense. Rage filled the stare directed at him. Jack was condemned for the destruction he had caused, and forgiveness was completely off the table. Then the knight drew a sword and struck the car. With immense force, the knight's sword carved straight through the roof of the car. However, before the blade could strike him, Jack caught it with his bare hand. Even then, he immediately noticed the weapon's sharp and dangerous edge. Alice recognized it at once. It was an enchanted sword, far beyond any normal weapon. Its destructive power was on another level, and she warned Jack to be careful. The knight tried to pull the blade back, but Jack refused to let go. Instead, he attempted to throw her off balance by slamming the car into a nearby wall. The impact was brutal. Her mount took heavy damage, yet the knight still clung tightly to her sword. Then the knight began an incantation. Moments later, the blade heated up and started to sizzle. The rising heat forced Jack to release his grip. Using the injured monster's head as a step, the knight launched herself upward. Jack immediately mocked the move, pointing out how cold it was to use her own mount as a tool for escape. A second later, she dropped back onto the roof of the car, clearly irritated by his non-stop remarks. She drove her sword through the roof again, nearly hitting Jack. At that moment, he realized the car would not survive much more of this. Alice called out to him, but Jack calmly told her not to worry. Then he drew his gun and fired upward at the knight above them. However, not the single shot landed. Still driving through the chaos, Jack casually noted that a submachine gun would have made this much easier. Then he aimed the car straight at the closed gate ahead and smashed through it without slowing down. Even after that crash, the knight was still on top. Jack told Alice to switch the car to autopilot, and she immediately did. With that handled, Jack pulled out his knife and stepped outside the vehicle, choosing to settle this in close combat. He leapt onto the roof and faced the knight directly. Jack greeted her with irritation, calling her an unwanted passenger and politely demanding she leave the car at once. The knight answered with full confidence. She promised he would regret ever appearing before her. Once someone entered her range, escape was impossible. The knight made the first move and launched a fast strike at Jack. However, Jack reacted immediately. He caught the hand holding the sword, pulled himself closer, and stared directly at her without fear. Before she could recover, Jack drove his knife into her leg and left it lodged there. Then he pulled the pin from the weapon and calmly declared the fight already finished. The knight tried to rip the blade out in panic, but Jack gave her no time. He treated the moment like handing over an express ticket to the next world. Then, with full force, he kicked her body and sent her flying high into the sky. Even while airborne, the knight still burned with anger. But Jack had already begun counting down. A second later, she exploded in midair. Jack watched the blast with open satisfaction, clearly impressed by the result. The weapon he used was a bomb dagger, a blade with explosives packed inside the hilt. It was still only a prototype, yet the performance had been more than acceptable. Jack immediately considered making several more in the future. Then, beside him, he noticed something left behind after the explosion. The knight's sword remained. Later, back inside the car, Jack proudly announced his return. On top of that, he claimed he had also brought back loot. Then he showed the captured sword to Alice. Alice calmly congratulated him for returning safely. Jack agreed at once and declared the whole thing a complete victory. In his excitement, he raised his hand toward Alice, expecting a high five. However, Alice flinched, clearly unfamiliar with the gesture. She asked what it was supposed to mean. Jack explained that it was called a high five. He was surprised she did not know it. Alice admitted it was the first time she had ever heard of such a thing and asked when people were meant to use it. Jack told her there was no strict rule. It was something people did when they felt happy, wanted to share the moment, or wanted to hype someone up. If it had to be explained simply, it was all about the feeling of the moment. Alice said she understood and quietly took note of it. Then she raised her own hand and gave a small smile. She remained there waiting for a second before asking whether Jack planned to leave her hanging. Jack hesitated briefly, then gladly accepted. Their hands met in a clean high five. Later, as they continued down the road, Jack admitted that he deeply missed wine and cigarettes. Alice replied that if they could just reach a town, they would be able to get both. She told him to hold on until then. Jack could only hope they found one soon. After that, Jack asked whether the car needed refueling. Alice explained that it did not. The golem system was designed to absorb magical power from the air itself. As long as they were simply traveling, fuel should not become a problem. Jack admitted that was extremely convenient. If only his old world had machines like this. However, Alice then turned her attention to the damaged roof of the car. She noted that they could not continue forever in that condition. She needed to gather some materials for repairs and future upgrades. Jack then asked if she had already decided where they should go next. Alice said she had considered several choices, but the best option was the independent nation of Youhei. She explained that Youhei was a cluster of cities spread across the hilly southern region of the empire. It had a unique self-governing system where 4 representatives each ruled their own territory. Jack chuckled at the word unique. In his experience, a nation described that way was probably not a peaceful place at all. Alice admitted that Jack was right. Youhei was home to countless criminal organizations, and the security there was notoriously bad. Jack simply answered that he had already figured as much. However, Alice explained that the chaos came with benefits. There were no proper records for entries or exits, so anyone could move around freely. There were also no official knights or soldiers. In her eyes, it sounded like the perfect place for them to disappear for a while. Jack understood the point immediately and agreed. Quietly, he also realized that in their current condition, moving through an outlaw town would probably be easier than traveling somewhere orderly. Alice then added another detail. Youhei seemed to be doing well economically. Compared to other regions, its tariffs were low and trade was active. Because of that, they might even be able to find the materials needed to repair the car. Jack agreed again and said that should be their destination. Alice then explained the distance. Under normal travel, reaching Youhei would take around 10 days. However, if they cut through the danger zone, the trip would only take 5. She warned him that powerful monsters lived inside that danger zone. Unless someone had a death wish, it was a road most people would never choose. Even so, she believed they could take that route this time. Jack found that confidence bold enough to question. He started asking if there was a reason for it. Before he could finish, Alice calmly raised 3 fingers. Jack looked at the gesture in confusion. She explained that there were 3 reasons. First, now that they had Jack with them, crossing the danger zone should be manageable. As an example, even famous heroes were not as high level as he was. Alice continued by explaining that the Knight Commander Jack had blown up was only around level 70. Even reaching level 40 was considered impressive for an average soldier. That meant Jack was completely outside the normal scale. Jack was genuinely surprised to hear that and asked if things were truly that extreme. Alice explained that the second reason for taking the danger zone was simple. She wanted to level up there. If someone defeated a powerful monster, their level would rise accordingly. Physical abilities would improve, and even the mana pool would grow larger. Alice believed that if she joined forces with Jack, they could safely hunt monsters along the way. In her eyes, that strength would be useful in the future. Jack nodded and admitted that she had a solid point. Alice then revealed the third reason for crossing the danger zone. Monster remains could also become excellent bomb materials. That caught Jack's attention immediately. To him, that was genuinely interesting. Alice explained that monster remains had many uses. They were commonly turned into weapons, but they could also serve in explosives. Some monsters even had blood that functioned like natural bombs. If packed inside carapace shards, the result could pierce through heavy armor. Jack quickly added that, because such materials had high affinity with magic, Alice could also imbue them with spells that made them even more flexible and dangerous. Then he admitted that, as expected of an alchemist, Alice truly knew her craft. Alice quietly appreciated the praise. Jack glanced at her and reflected for a moment. He had first assumed Alice was the silent type. However, whenever the topic touched her specialty, she became far more talkative. To Jack, Alice was proving to be much more expressive than he first believed. Alice noticed Jack looking at her and asked what was wrong. She added that if he disliked the plan, they could always take the longer route instead. Jack dismissed that idea immediately. In his eyes, they would of course take the shortest path. After all, only good things could come from it. But then Jack spotted trucks moving behind them. It seemed they were being followed all the way from the city. He could only note that their pursuers were impressively persistent. Jack mentioned that it would be nice if he had something useful to work with. In response, Alice calmly handed him a gun. She had already loaded the ammo for him. Jack thanked her and quietly thought that she was remarkably considerate. Then he stepped out of the car and told Alice to stay put for a moment. If the vehicle took any more damage, it would become a real nuisance. Alice agreed without complaint. Jack then walked toward the soldiers with complete confidence, carrying the kind of presence that made him look like the villain in someone else's story. As he approached, the soldiers quickly prepared themselves. They opened fire relentlessly. However, Jack dodged every shot with ease, moving as if none of it required effort. While weaving through the bullets, he even wondered where they were aiming. To him, those soldiers from another world had clearly been neglecting their training. With that thought, Jack decided it was time to show them how the real thing was done. He raised his gun and took aim. Jack raised his gun toward a truck charging straight at him. With one clean shot, he hit the wheel and threw the vehicle off balance. It swerved hard and crashed into a nearby tree. However, that still was not enough for him. Jack casually tossed a tear gas bomb onto the soldiers riding inside, adding one more layer of suffering. He laughed at the result and openly mocked them. But then another truck came rushing in fast, with the soldiers screaming at him as the bomb maniac. Jack lowered his body, built momentum, and leapt onto the back of the moving truck. The first soldier was smashed down instantly. He then turned to the second man, drove a punch into his face, and slammed him into the floor of the truck. For Jack, overpowering enemies with only a little force felt exciting. However, there was one annoying problem. His high level had boosted him so much that controlling his own strength had become difficult. Ever since the battle with the gatekeeper, he had been trying to stay careful. Once the soldiers in the back were dealt with, Jack broke the rear glass and reached inside. He grabbed the driver by the neck and made it clear this would end quickly. The truck continued moving wildly with no control. Then Jack jumped off, leaving the vehicle to crash straight into another tree. Some soldiers were still alive and stumbled out of the wreck. One of them, full of frustration, demanded another fight. Jack answered by jumping directly at him and stomping him into the ground. The second soldier tried to calm the situation, but that chance lasted only a second. Jack pulled out his gun and fired straight into the man's face. After the chaos settled, Jack stepped down from the wreck feeling fully satisfied. Now it was time for something even better. Boop. He found a large box filled with different weapons and proudly carried it over. Calling out to Alice for help, he handed the job to her. Alice calmly said to leave it to her. The moment she placed her hand on the car, giant golem hands suddenly rose from the ground. They took the box Jack was carrying, then gathered the remaining crates as well. In moments, everything was moved. Jack watched in open amazement. To him, that level of convenience almost made magic worth studying. Unfortunately, Alice quickly shut that dream down. Jack had no magical ability at all. Alice told Jack that reaching such a high level while still having no magic power was almost impressive in its own way. To her, it clearly meant he had no natural talent for magic at all. Jack thanked her for the very complete diagnosis. Thanks to that, he had fully given up on the dream. And this time, he was actually serious. Later, as they traveled through the jungle, Jack looked outside and noticed the road was buried under so much greenery that it barely looked like a road anymore. He even started to doubt they were heading the right way. So he asked Alice if she was sure they were still going toward Youhei. Alice answered with total confidence. Then she showed him a magic item that pointed out the exact direction. According to it, they were still moving forward on the shortest route possible. Jack accepted that answer. Meanwhile, strange hands from the car kept reaching out and grabbing things from all around them. Jack finally asked what those hands were even doing. Alice explained that they were collecting anything useful along the way, such as materials and even food. Jack had to admit that was smart. Since they had time to spare, he decided to use it productively and make more bombs. He handed the driving over to Alice. She calmly accepted and wished him luck. For Jack, making bombs was usually a tense and risky process. However, in this world, even while riding through the jungle, he could craft them with ease. That was one skill he absolutely wanted to bring back home. As he carefully checked the Molotov cocktail, Alice asked how the work was going. Jack confirmed everything was fine. Then he grabbed some wood from outside and later turned it into a bow. Alice was genuinely impressed by the craftsmanship. She asked if he used to be an archer. Jack explained that not really. He had only used bows a few times for jobs before, but they were always useful to have ready. He also mentioned it would have been nice if the soldiers earlier had carried bows, but since they did not, he simply made one himself. Then he revealed the real idea. If a small bomb was attached to an arrow, the bow would become a bomb launcher. Alice looked at Jack's new weapon and pointed out that the bomb would probably fly farther if he simply threw it by hand. Jack agreed that she was likely right. However, if the goal was to hit one exact spot, the bow would give far better accuracy. And since he had just built it himself, he wanted to test it immediately. He climbed onto the roof of their moving car and searched the forest for something worth hunting. Then, in the distance, something unusual caught his eye. A giant mantis stood among the trees. Jack asked what kind of creature it was. Alice explained that it was a forest monster so dangerous that only a full squad of knights could match its strength. Its shell was tougher than metal, and its scythe-like arms were sharp enough to pierce armor. Jack could hardly believe something like that lived in the wild here. The creature was peacefully minding its own business, but Jack told Alice to stop the car at once. She quickly realized what he intended. To Jack, close combat against that monster was unnecessary trouble. He could probably overpower it, but the risk of damaging the golem car or putting Alice in danger was not worth it. So he chose the safer option, the bomb arrow. As he took aim, Alice suddenly stopped him. She wanted to cast an enchantment on the weapon first. She touched the arrow and enhanced it with support magic. Alice admitted she also wanted the experience points from helping. In her view, this was a smart and efficient way to level up. Jack respected the idea immediately. Then he fired. The arrow struck the giant mantis harder than expected. Jack noticed the power increase right away and guessed Alice's support magic had boosted the shot. The arrow remained stuck in the monster's body for a moment. Then it exploded. Even after the blast, the mantis was still alive. Alice calmly handed Jack another arrow. Jack looked at the wounded creature and decided to end things quickly. This time he aimed for the head. The second arrow flew true, struck its target, and exploded on impact. With the hunt finished, Jack felt fully satisfied. He even joked that he might have real talent for archery. If money ever ran dry, maybe he had found a new career path. Alice told him that if anyone could rise to the top, it would be Jack. Jack laughed and said praise was nice, but all he truly knew was bombs. Then he moved closer to inspect the corpse and noticed something useful. The monster's body could likely be used as crafting material. Alice agreed at once. They should collect it. Their wild road trip continued deep into the night. However, the journey was far from peaceful. A group of goblins suddenly appeared and tried to loot them on the road. Jack handled the problem immediately. He fired an arrow into one goblin, then followed it up by throwing an improvised hand grenade that blasted the rest. Jack was briefly confused about what those creatures even were. Alice explained that they were goblins, monsters known for attacking people in groups. Once he heard that, Jack realized this world really did have the creatures he had heard about before. But then another threat came charging in. A giant boar rushed straight toward them. Jack aimed his bow, struck its head with an explosive arrow, and triggered the blast. Yet the beast barely slowed down. To Jack, that attack clearly was not enough. Alice explained that giant wild boars would keep charging until they collapsed. If one crashed directly into them, even the golem armor on the car would be nearly useless. This area was filled with high-level monsters. So Jack changed tactics. He threw one of his magic explosives at the boar, and the detonation was massive. As usual, he laughed at the result and proudly noted that the rough recipe still worked just fine. Alice wondered why it had been so effective. Maybe luck played a part. Poorly made items couldn't fire, but sometimes they also created strange and unpredictable effects. She warned him to be careful. Before they could rest, another monster appeared. A giant snake emerged next. Jack found it interesting rather than threatening. He calmly aimed his gun at its neck and fired. Soon after, even more creatures showed up, including giant wolves and a giant tortoise. Jack looked around and compared the scene to a monster parade. At this rate, a peaceful camp for the night was clearly impossible. Good thing the car could drive itself on autopilot. Meanwhile, Alice was thrilled for a different reason. Her level was rising quickly thanks to all the support she was giving Jack. Jack asked what level she had reached. Alice explained that she had started at 21, and now she had gained 7 levels already. Jack reacted as if that was small progress. Alice quickly corrected him. For normal people, that was an incredible jump. Jack was simply the strange exception to every rule. Jack laughed at first, but when he checked his status screen, the mood changed quickly. After all that fighting, his level had only gone up by 1. That result clearly disappointed him. Alice explained the reason right away. The higher someone's level became, the more experience points were needed for the next one. That was simply how growth worked. Then she handed Jack 2 bullets she had enhanced herself. Her enchantment skills were improving as well, which meant the more monsters Jack defeated, the stronger Alice would become beside him. Naturally, she was counting on him. For Jack, that was actually good news. He had no plan to treat Alice like some princess who needed constant protection. They were partners with matching goals, nothing more and nothing less. He intended to help her when possible, but unexpected trouble always happened. If things went wrong, it would be better if Alice could survive on her own. Jack also knew one personal truth. Escort missions had never been his specialty. Then he noticed something strange. The area had gone quiet. Alice agreed and warned him not to lower his guard. Silence in a dangerous place often meant something worse was coming. As usual, Alice continued working in the meantime. She placed enchantments onto one of Jack's improvised hand grenades, this time adding an attribute tied to psychosis. Jack checked it and saw the weapon's properties had increased again. Alice explained that she was also experimenting with effects that could harm enemies immune to normal physical attacks. Jack openly praised how useful that ability was. Alice accepted the compliment quietly. Then Jack asked a more serious question. Had she actually decided how to destroy the world yet? Alice admitted she had not. Completely wiping out the world was far harder than it sounded. Even the wars from the Age of the Gods had failed to erase human history. That alone proved how difficult the task was. To Alice, humanity looked fragile on the surface, yet remained strangely resilient. For Jack, hearing all this was almost amusing. Until now, he had never truly stopped to think about what destroying an entire world would even require. Destroying the world was the kind of phrase Jack had only ever heard in anime or manga. He never imagined the day would come when he would personally be involved in something like that. Alice believed his skills could help make it possible, but Jack still questioned whether such a thing could truly be done. Wiping out a city was one matter. Destroying an entire world was on a completely different scale. However, the idea fascinated him. More than anything, Jack wanted to witness a bomb powerful enough to erase a world. And in his mind, there was one simple condition. If he could return to his original world before it happened, then there was no downside for him at all. Alice explained that she already had a few ideas. She wanted to travel to different places and run experiments along the way. Jack was so deep in thought that she had to call his attention back. Once he focused again, he agreed. Alice admitted it seemed she would be relying on Jack a lot. Jack answered that the feeling went both ways. Then he remembered something important. Destroying the world could wait, but Alice needed to keep thinking about the return magic that would send him home. For Jack, that part was a matter of life and death. Alice assured him she understood. Alice quietly realized that if she became careless for even a moment, Jack would likely stop helping her. Jack confirmed that much himself. He hated being looked down on more than anything. Then his tone darkened for a moment. He warned that he might end up becoming unpleasant if pushed too far. The two locked eyes in silence. A second later, Jack casually brushed it off as a joke. He claimed to be kind to women and children, and that his conscience would never allow anything harsh. Alice clearly did not believe it was fully a joke, but let it pass. She then made her own position clear. Betraying Jack was never part of her plan. Instead, she genuinely looked forward to working with him from now on. Jack felt the same and admitted he would be counting on her too. With that, Jack extended his hand for a handshake at the exact moment Alice raised hers for a high five. Once again, the two were completely out of sync. Then Jack gave Alice the high five she had raised earlier, even if neither of them seemed fully sure why. Alice went quiet for a moment before wondering if it was meant to celebrate the confirmation of their partnership. Jack pointed out that she was the one who came up with that meaning in the first place, and now she was questioning it herself. When Alice asked if it was an important moment, Jack admitted she was not exactly wrong. As the mood settled, Jack reflected on how strangely natural things had become between them. Somehow, the two had started opening up to each other. That was a good sign. Since they would be working together for a long time, some level of trust was necessary. A partnership built only on benefits would eventually break apart. People were not machines. Feelings mattered, and cold calculations alone would never keep anyone alive. Balance was important. After a brief silence, Alice said she wanted to hear about the world Jack came from. Jack thought about it for a moment and realized he had no idea where to begin. But then something far more urgent stole his attention. A massive shadow was descending from the sky. Jack could hardly believe what he was seeing. He immediately tightened his grip and prepared to drive faster. The creature crashed down in front of them. It was enormous. Alice identified it at once. A dragon, a living calamity, and the ultimate predator of this world. She made one thing clear immediately. They needed to run, or this would end badly. As the threat rushed closer, Jack let out a nervous laugh and gripped the steering wheel tightly. Then he slammed the car into reverse at full speed. At the same time, Alice used her magic to rotate the vehicle, spinning them around so they could flee from the dragon. Jack could only comment on the situation with disbelief. First magic, then monsters, and now dragons. If this world was fantasy, it was committed to the theme. He glanced back at the dragon chasing them and fired his gun. The bullet hit, but it had no effect at all. Realizing that would not be enough, Jack told Alice the car was already on self-driving mode and left control to her. Then he raised his bow. The dragon's massive claw came down, ready to crush them. At the last second, Jack released the arrow. It flew straight into the dragon's eye and exploded on impact. Jack admitted the strike had come dangerously close. They were nearly flattened. Behind them, the dragon roared in pain, and for a moment Jack wondered if that had finally done the job. However, the beast simply shook its head and brushed off the damage. Jack could only stare at how absurdly tough it was. At that moment, he had never wanted a rocket launcher more in his life. Alice quickly explained why. Dragons carried natural defensive magic across their scales. Weak attacks meant nothing to them. Even enhanced bullets and explosive arrows could do little more than leave minor burns. Jack realized that most of the monsters around here were one thing. This dragon was something else entirely. Alice agreed. She never expected to meet one in a place like this. In her view, their luck had turned terrible. Still, Jack refused to back down. He mocked the dragon for coming all this way just to meet him while preparing an improvised hand grenade. As the creature's claw reached toward them again, Jack threw the explosive straight at it. The blast knocked the dragon down, giving Jack a small sense of satisfaction. That feeling lasted only a moment. Jack watched in shock as the beast stood right back up. Then it released a deafening roar that shook the air around them. Frustrated now, Jack grabbed another explosive and hurled it again. In his mind, he was the bomb maniac who once erased an entire city. The monster before him was nothing more than a giant lizard, and deep down, Jack had no intention of losing to something like that. Jack quickly pulled out several more explosives. Just as the dragon opened its jaws to devour the car, he hurled them straight into its mouth. A second later, the blasts erupted from inside the beast. The dragon roared in pain as smoke poured from its mouth. Jack, of course, took the chance to brag. He wondered how his tear gas and firebomb mix tasted, and even joked that he could share the recipe. To him, this was the true power of humankind. Alice immediately shut that down. This was not the time for boasting. She asked Jack if he had noticed what was directly ahead. When he turned, he saw the real problem. Cliffs. Jack questioned whether she was imagining things, because he did not remember passing such terrain. Alice realized it looked like a massive crack had split the ground, something she had not even noticed earlier. Strangely, Jack called that amazing news. Then he checked the side mirror and saw the dragon preparing another move. Their luck was somehow getting worse. Jumping off a cliff was impossible, so the only option left was to dive into the forest and hope they survived. Before they could act, something slammed onto the car. The dragon's claw pierced through the roof and seized the vehicle in its grip. Jack froze for a moment at the sight. Alice immediately tried to use magic to escape, but then discovered a new disaster. She had lost control of the golems. Some of the rear cores had been crushed, and the car could no longer transform. Jack could only say the situation was perfect in the worst possible way. He even felt like crying. Then he suddenly turned serious and admitted this was supposed to be a romantic drive date. With that, he stepped out and climbed onto the roof, facing the dragon with a fierce look. The dragon lifted the entire car high into the air and shook it violently. Jack held on with everything he had while hanging above the cliffs. He cursed the beast for treating him like a toy and warned it not to underestimate him. Then he looked at the weapons in his hands and understood the truth. They were useless now. Only one option remained: his fist. Jack did not know if it would work. He had no proof at all. But there was no time left to hesitate. He built momentum, then drove a full punch into the dragon's claw. A massive crack spread instantly. The claw shattered and broke apart. Jack smiled in satisfaction while the dragon stared at its ruined limb in disbelief. The beast quickly flew upward in panic. Jack laughed, thrilled that the punch had worked even better than expected. His level scaling was real. But then Alice screamed for him. They were falling off the cliff. One disaster had barely ended, and another had already begun. Beneath the cliff was water, and that was the only reason they survived the fall. Jack recovered quickly, looked around, and took control of the situation at once. He dragged Alice out of the damaged car and admitted to himself that this disaster was one complete mess. Without wasting time, he gave first aid. Using what he had nearby, Jack made makeshift braces for Alice's broken arm and injured foot. After checking both of them, he realized the damage could have been far worse. Falling from that height should have ended badly, yet their injuries were limited. In Jack's view, luck was somehow still on their side. He also noticed his own wounds were already healing. Once again, the power of level scaling proved ridiculous. As for Alice, Jack figured her broken bones were only part of the story. She likely used magic during the fall to reduce some of the impact. On top of that, leveling up had probably strengthened her body as well. For someone who had lived 13 lives, durability clearly came with experience. Later, Jack searched through one of the supply boxes and grabbed some food. The moment he took a bite, regret hit instantly. The taste was so terrible that he compared it to chewing on someone's shoe insole. Then his eyes moved to the dragon claw still lodged in their wrecked car. Jack began reviewing the fight seriously. The dragon was nearly immune to ranged attacks. Bombs and bullets could not pierce its scales. Even his mix of tear gas and Molotov fire had done little real damage. The only thing that worked was his lucky punch. But that kind of move only came out when he was pushed to the edge. To deal with a flying dragon properly, he needed overwhelming firepower from a distance. A concentrated attack. If he still had access to the weapons from his old world, the problem would be simple. But complaining would solve nothing now. He could only build something himself. One thing was certain. Jack had no intention of letting that dragon escape forever. The next time they met, he planned to put it down for good. And while planning revenge, another thought entered his mind. Dragon meat would make one extravagant meal. Then Jack checked the car's engine for a moment. After one look, he realized he had no idea how to repair a magical engine. So for once, he made the smart choice. He would wait until Alice woke up. Jack pushed the car out of the water and tried not to move it too roughly. Alice was still lying on top, and one careless shove could make her fall. Even so, he dragged the heavy vehicle with surprising ease. Later, once the car reached solid ground, Jack turned to Alice and tried to wake her. She did not respond. Still deep asleep, she looked like she would be out for quite a while. Jack did not mind pushing the car around by himself, but there was one clear problem. If a monster with magic abilities appeared now, things could turn ugly fast. For the moment, they still had enough food and drinkable water, so Jack decided waiting was the smarter choice. Once they got out of this place, he even considered learning how to use magic somehow. People said old dogs could not learn new tricks, but Jack liked to believe he might be the exception again. While lost in thought, he suddenly heard footsteps nearby. Jack immediately hid behind some rocks and carefully looked ahead. Something was coming, but he could not tell yet if it was human or monster. Soon the answer appeared. A group of short, old-looking men with long beards stepped into view, each carrying weapons. Jack quickly noticed two things. They were heavily bearded, and some of them carried guns. From the way they moved, they did not look like amateurs. He judged that killing them would be possible if needed. However, starting a gunfight now would be dangerous. Alice could catch a stray bullet, and Jack still needed her if he wanted to return to his world. So he watched carefully and weighed his options. If they were enemies, striking first might be necessary. But fighting in their current condition carried enormous risk. Then one of the bearded men spotted him and called out immediately. He demanded to know who Jack was and why he was there. They declared this land belonged to the dwarf tribe. Another one quickly suggested that Jack might be a poacher. Jack quietly reached for his gun at first. However, after a moment he lowered it and decided acting harmless would be the smarter move. He stepped out into the open and signaled for the dwarves to wait. Then he quickly explained that everything was a misunderstanding. He was not a poacher. The dwarf stayed silent and watched him closely, saying nothing. Jack continued his story. He claimed he had nearly been swallowed by a dragon, but managed to defeat it while escaping in a golem car. During the chaos, he fell from a cliff and drifted into this area by accident. He had no intention of entering their territory, and if he knew the road back to the surface, he would already be gone. Then he simply asked for directions out. What truly caught the dwarves' attention was one part of that story. Jack said he defeated a dragon. One of them immediately questioned whether he was telling the truth. Jack answered by asking why he would bother lying. Then he pointed them toward the wrecked car nearby. Stuck in the vehicle was the dragon's claw. The dwarves stared in disbelief and asked if they could inspect it more closely. Jack agreed at once and casually noted there was no entrance fee for curious visitors. The group hurried over and leaned in with open fascination, examining the claw like craftsmen seeing a treasure for the first time. They were amazed. One dwarf admitted it truly looked like a real dragon claw, then asked Jack where he had managed to obtain something so rare. Jack reminded them that he had already explained it. It was simply a souvenir from the dragon he brought down. The dwarf still looked doubtful. The story sounded impossible, yet Jack's eyes did not seem deceitful. Jack answered with full confidence. He trusted his own strength, and next time, he would make sure to kill the dragon for real. That statement stunned the dwarves even more than the claw itself. The idea of one man planning to slay a dragon alone was hard to ignore. Jack answered with full confidence. He planned to cook that giant lizard properly one day. Then he added that actions always hit harder than words. It did not matter where the dragon was hiding. Jack intended to drag it out by the tail and blow it apart. The dwarves stayed silent, unsure whether to admire him or question his sanity. Then one of them noticed Alice still lying in the car and asked if she was Jack's wife. Jack quickly cleared that up. She was only his companion, more like a partner in crime. When they asked if she was injured, Jack explained that several bones had snapped during the fall, but she would survive. The dwarf commented that being attacked by a dragon was terrible luck. However, meeting them here might have been fate. He invited Jack and Alice to rest at their village. Jack pointed out the obvious problem. Alice was unconscious, and the vehicle was badly damaged. The dwarf calmly answered that the car could be examined and possibly repaired once they reached the village. Jack admitted that sounded good, though he worried about becoming a burden. The dwarf then explained they wanted something in return and pointed toward the dragon claw. They only asked for a small piece of it. To the dwarves, dragon claw was a rare material almost impossible to obtain. Even a thumb-sized fragment could be brewed into panacea and held great value. Jack understood immediately. This was simply business through exchange. He considered the offer for a moment, then agreed. It was a fair deal, and he happily sealed it. The dwarf praised Jack for being a reasonable young man. With that settled, the dwarves prepared to escort them away. And just like that, Jack and Alice were on their way to the dwarf village. The dwarf pointed the way and asked Jack if he could pull the cart up the slope. Jack agreed without hesitation and started dragging the cart upward. Some of the dwarves were amazed by how strong he was, while others started asking where he got that kind of muscle from. Their leader immediately silenced them, and the noisy chatter quickly died down. The dwarf leader apologized to Jack for all the noise. Jack brushed it off and thought the whole trip had become much more entertaining with those dwarves around. Jack looked at them as a bunch of gullible people. Until they reached the dwarven village, he believed it was better to stay on good terms with them. Even so, he still felt that he could not completely lower his guard. His gaze shifted toward Alice, and he imagined that once she woke up, it would probably be difficult for her to fit in with these overly generous dwarves. The dwarf leader then asked where Jack was heading, mentioning that there were no towns or roads anywhere around that area. Jack explained that they were on their way to the independent nation of Youhei, and he believed crossing through the forest would give them a shortcut. The dwarf leader admitted that it might be true, but still thought the plan sounded reckless. Still, considering Jack possessed enough power to drive away a dragon, the idea did not seem entirely impossible. Not long after, they encountered several worm monsters nearby. The dwarf leader was surprised that monsters had appeared in the area. The moment the dwarves saw them, one of them excitedly declared that they had a huge haul ahead of them and that tonight would be a feast. Another shouted that they should not let any of them escape. The dwarves immediately began exterminating the monsters one after another. Looking at the dead creatures, Jack found it hard to believe that those things were actually edible. Afterward, Jack noticed the large amount they had gathered and asked if he should help carry them. One of the dwarves told him it was unnecessary and that he only needed to make sure Alice stayed safe. Jack accepted that and thanked them for their concern, while the dwarves happily celebrated the great haul they had managed to get that day. After some time, they finally arrived at the dwarves' village. The sight before him left Jack unable to finish his words out of astonishment. The dwarf introduced the place as their village and told Jack to make himself at home. As they passed through, several dwarves from the village curiously wondered what they were dragging along with them. Jack observed the surroundings carefully. Beards were everywhere, and not a single member of another race could be seen. He realized that it was probably uncommon for a human outsider to even step into this place. He assumed that news of his arrival had not spread there yet. From his own experiences, Jack knew that secluded communities like this usually did not welcome strangers kindly, so he had expected to be shunned. Yet the thing that surprised him the most was how kind the dwarves actually seemed to be. The dwarf then informed Jack that they would first head to the elder's place, since his situation needed to be reported properly. He warned Jack that he probably would not be thrown out, but it was simply part of their procedure. A few moments later, they arrived at their destination. The dwarf explained that it was the elder's home, which also served as their regular meeting place. The dwarf suggested that if necessary, they should first focus on treating the young lady, Alice. Jack refused and pointed out that this meeting would not take long anyway. While carrying Alice in his arms, he insisted that things would be fine. Deep down, Jack admitted that while he trusted the dwarves, it was still better to stay cautious. Alice's ability was too valuable to him, and as long as she stayed beside him, he believed he could at least keep her protected. The dwarf understood Jack's reasoning and assured him that they would keep an eye on his luggage, so there was no need to worry about anything going missing. Jack accepted that and told the others that he trusted all of them. Even so, Jack quietly thought to himself that if his belongings somehow ended up stolen, he would simply return to his old reliable method of violence to get them back. According to Jack's own code of conduct, there was no mercy for evil deeds. Still, he doubted it would come to that, because those dwarves genuinely seemed like kind people to him. He could not sense the sort of hidden malice that bad people usually carried around them. A few moments later, they entered the room, and the dwarf informed his father that they had a guest. He then guided Jack to take a seat. Hearing the word father, Jack realized that the two of them were family. The dwarf explained to his father that Jack and Alice belonged to the human race. Jack introduced himself, then pointed toward Alice resting on his shoulder and introduced her as well. He went on to explain to the elder that they had been drifting through the cave stream when the elder's son found them and helped them out. The elder immediately remarked that a dangerous man had been brought before him, as Jack's soul was twisted. Hearing the mention of souls, Jack wondered if the elder possessed an ability similar to Alice's. Jack admitted that he was probably somewhat incompetent and acknowledged that he did not live a naive life filled with kindness and peace. The elder noted that Jack was also quite the talker. Even so, the elder made it clear that he had no intention of investigating Jack's past. The outside world meant nothing to them. What truly mattered was the future of their village. Jack quickly realized that the elder already understood what kind of man he was, yet he still found it hard to believe that the elder would not press him any further. The elder then asked Jack why he had drifted all the way there. Jack explained that he was seeking medical attention for his companion and also needed repairs for his vehicle. He added that he was not asking for charity, since he had already paid a proper price in exchange for their help. The dwarf then presented the payment and explained that he had received a fragment from a dragon's claw. It appeared that Jack's group had encountered a dragon before ending up underground. After examining the item more closely, the elder realized that it truly was a real dragon's claw. He then questioned whether Jack had somehow randomly stumbled upon such a thing. Jack responded by asking whether he really looked like the type of man who would lie about something like that. He firmly stated that the claw was genuine loot taken from that giant lizard. He then added that his vehicle had been heavily damaged in the process, so in his eyes, both sides were already even. The elder then began speaking about the dragon. According to him, the creature had arrived around 10 days ago. It had currently settled on a mountain located not too far from their village. The elder believed it was likely a stray dragon that had been cast out from its herd. After arriving in the area, it began hunting anything that moved, and even the villagers themselves had already suffered attacks from it. The elder suddenly fell silent and stared at Jack for a long moment. Confused by the reaction, Jack asked what exactly the elder was trying to imply. The elder replied that Jack surely already understood and that he seemed to have a good idea of it himself. Jack carefully lowered Alice to the ground before telling the elder that he thought very highly of him. After that, he walked directly toward the elder. The dwarf's son immediately tried to stop him, but Jack ignored it. He grabbed the elder by the collar and bluntly stated that he did not care whether the man was an elder, Elvis, or some eldritch being, because the old man was starting to get on his nerves. Jack added that he did not appreciate being pressured into doing work and demanded that the elder finally get straight to the point. The elder calmly stated that he understood. Slowly, he reached for the dagger at his side before suddenly attacking Jack with a swift motion. Jack narrowly avoided the strike, but the assault did not stop there. The elder attacked again, and Jack blocked the next strike. Then another one followed immediately after. The exchange continued until Jack finally spotted an opening. In that instant, he pulled out his gun and successfully aimed it directly at the elder's throat. Even then, the elder remained completely unfazed. Instead of surrendering, he simply gripped the gun firmly even while it was pressed against his throat. Jack warned him not to make any sudden moves and pointed out that even if the elder was blind, he still had to understand the situation he was in. Jack also remarked that the elder probably did not want his own son cleaning his brains off the floor. After that, Jack released him. The elder then burst into loud laughter that sounded almost like Santa Claus. The elder apologized and explained that he merely wanted to test Jack a little. According to him, the best way to understand another person was through a fight. He admitted that he had not expected Jack to become that angry. Feeling irritated, Jack wondered what exactly was wrong with that old man. The dwarf's son then explained that his father was the most battle-hungry man in their entire village, and that ridiculous excuse had only been an excuse for him to enjoy a small spar with Jack. The elder then praised Jack as a great warrior. He pointed out that Jack did not simply rely on his level alone, but had also sharpened his actual combat skills. Because of that, the elder declared that the dwarf race welcomed him. Meanwhile, the dwarf's son looked embarrassed and admitted that there was always something ridiculous happening whenever his father got involved. Alice finally woke up. Jack was already nearby waiting for her, and he greeted her while asking if she had slept well the previous night. Alice greeted him back, and Jack immediately asked about the condition of her body. Alice admitted that it was not too bad, although some of her bones had been fractured. Jack realized those injuries came from when they fell off the cliff, and he apologized, wishing he could have protected her better. Alice told him not to dwell on it since it was not really his fault. She calmly explained that her bones could be healed quickly anyway. Right after that, she began casting a healing spell onto her arm. Not long after, she removed the brace around it and started healing her legs as well. Jack found it amazing and asked if that was magic too. Alice confirmed that it was healing magic and explained that her third self specialized as a healer. Afterward, Alice asked where exactly they were. Jack explained that they were currently staying inside a dwarven village. He informed her that the dwarves had allowed him to use an entire abandoned building for themselves. Jack then explained that he had met the dwarves in the underground cavern and somehow earned their respect. Alice commented that dwarves naturally admired strength, and she could understand why they were drawn toward Jack. Jack jokingly felt like he was being treated as some kind of hero and told Alice to take a look at the huge amount of supplies the dwarves had gathered for him. Alice admitted that it truly was a massive amount, so much that there was no way the two of them could finish all of it themselves. Jack agreed and revealed that the dwarves were planning to host a welcoming party for them the next day. He believed they were genuinely happy that he had helped subjugate the dragon. Alice then asked what he meant by subjugating the dragon. Jack explained that the village chief had given them a quest to defeat the dragon living on a nearby mountain, since the creature had been terrorizing the villagers for a while. He added that the ugly lizard had already been getting on his nerves, so he accepted the offer without much hesitation. Alice understood his reasoning. Jack then mentioned that the chief was actually a pretty clever man. The dragon claw fragment had been used as bargaining material, and in exchange, the dwarves were sending their best craftsmen to repair the car and forge weapons for them. On top of that, Jack could drink as much wine and smoke as many cigars as he wanted. As he lit up one of the cigars and took a puff, a pleasant sensation immediately spread through him. Jack soon realized that although it looked like a cigar, it was actually packed with medicinal herbs instead of tobacco, which honestly was not bad at all. At that moment, he felt like this world had finally become a little more livable. Meanwhile, Alice quietly stared at the wine nearby. Jack noticed her gaze and asked whether she was even allowed to drink alcohol. Alice answered that she could, but only a little. Jack then grabbed another glass and handed it over to her. After that, Jack asked what exactly they should drink to celebrate. Alice paused for a moment to think before coming up with an answer involving the unfortunate fate of the dragon. She then asked if that sounded good enough. Jack found the answer perfect, and the two of them raised their glasses together. Later that same day, the golem and several dwarves worked side by side while repairing the car. During the repairs, Jack overheard Alice asking one of the dwarves for a magic crystal, and the dwarf confidently assured her that he had something suitable for her. Watching the interaction, Jack noticed how naturally the two sides got along with each other. He quietly wondered if that sort of understanding simply came naturally among craftsmen. Jack later asked Alice whether the repairs were progressing smoothly. Alice confirmed that everything was going well. She admitted that she was genuinely glad to have the dwarves helping them. Since the region was rich with high-quality minerals, there was even a chance that the vehicle's performance would improve beyond simple repairs. Jack was pleased to hear that and mentioned how excited the driver inside him was becoming. Alice responded by telling him that they should both continue doing their best. Later on, after gathering all the materials he needed, Jack began preparing a bomb specifically meant for the dragon. He used various things he had collected since arriving there, along with materials provided by the dwarves. His main focus was maximizing destructive power, and once the bomb was complete, all he needed afterward was a good throw. Alice eventually came over to check on him and asked how the bomb crafting was going. Jack casually answered that it was turning out pretty well. What he ended up creating was a dragon's claw bomb. Alice noticed that he had used a fragment of the dragon's claw itself, and Jack confirmed it. He explained that by mixing a small amount of magical liquid into the explosives, the bomb he created had become second only to the city core bomb in destructive power. On top of that, he had also created another weapon, a sticky bomb. It was made using slime mucus given to them by the dwarves. Along with it came a specialized coagulating liquid, so Jack experimented by embedding a pull-tap-style explosive directly into the mixture. Alice then explained the properties of slime mucus. Anyone hit by it would become far more vulnerable to magic, making magical attacks significantly more effective. By combining that effect with the bomb, the dragon's defenses could be weakened, which in turn would increase the destructive power of magic-enhanced explosives. Even though Alice already knew Jack could create bombs using slime materials, she still had not expected something this powerful. She became curious about the mixing ratio Jack used for the ingredients. Jack then showed her the process, explaining that he mixed one ingredient with another before adding a specific amount of something else to complete it. Alice stated that she understood now, and once again recognized that this was something only Jack's skill could achieve. Even after seeing the process herself, she still could not properly comprehend how he managed to craft such things. Jack simply laughed and admitted that he did not fully understand it himself either. Jack explained that handling explosives had not changed much compared to his original world. However, the materials in this world could only truly be judged through their ingredients and effects. If he stubbornly clung to common knowledge and failed to adapt, then he would never get anywhere. That was the conclusion he had reached. Yet strangely enough, almost everything he experimented with ended up succeeding. All he really needed to do was continue working on it. Even so, Jack understood that if he ignored proper calculations for the ratios and materials, he still would not achieve the firepower he wanted. To test the results, he tossed one of the bombs away and observed the outcome. Alice then commented on bomb making EX++, noting that the skill practically guaranteed success in bomb crafting, even if it meant bending the very rules of the world itself. Jack then asked about Alice's side of the work and wanted to know if the golem car had finally been fully repaired. Alice confirmed that it was. She explained that the original car had been built using 10 golems, but this time she had increased the number to 20. Because of that, she believed the chances of breakdowns or performance issues would become much lower. The moment Jack saw the upgraded vehicle, he was genuinely amazed by how different it looked now. He found the improvements incredible and could hardly believe that so many upgrades had been completed within just a single day. Alice further explained that the car now possessed a defensive barrier along with the ability to fire magical rays. Thanks to its transformation modes, it could also travel across water or even dive underwater. Jack found all of that extremely impressive. Alice then mentioned that they still planned to add even more features later on. She asked Jack if he had any specific requests for future upgrades. Jack admitted that he had none for the moment. The vehicle had already surpassed his expectations so much that he was still stunned by it. Alice thanked him and expressed how happy she was to hear that reaction. Not long after, Jack requested a test drive. Later on, the two of them were already inside the upgraded car, happily testing its performance. For Jack, the entire experience felt exhilarating. That same night, inside the village bar, Jack wrestled one of the dwarves to the ground while the others loudly enjoyed themselves around him. Another dwarf immediately stepped forward and declared that it was now his turn. Jack realized that this gathering was their official welcoming party. Even if it was all meant as friendly recreation, he still needed to stay careful not to accidentally kill any of them. The atmosphere strangely reminded him of his old military training days. To him, opportunities like this were important. While most of the dwarves enjoyed the celebration, Alice quietly sat nearby and watched. At the same time, one of the dwarf sons asked his father whether Jack could truly defeat the dragon. The elder dwarf hesitated for a moment without immediately giving an answer. The son dwarf admitted that Jack was undeniably strong, but the dragon was not an enemy they could simply confront head-on, even if all of them fought together with everything they had. The elder remarked that those words carried the spirit of a true dwarf warrior. The son dwarf then explained that many of their people had already died because of the dragon attacks. Their supplies had become limited, and their logistics were suffering heavy delays. If they failed to gain anything from working together with Jack, things would only grow worse. As both of them quietly watched Jack from afar, the elder described him as a monster from another world. Joining hands with someone like him could certainly be dangerous, but if they failed to deal with the dragon, then all they could do was wait to become its next meal. The elder then asked his son whether being eaten and destroyed was truly an outcome he desired. The son dwarf immediately rejected the idea and firmly admitted that he had no intention of giving up. Meanwhile, Alice quietly observed the night from the window. Back inside the bar, the wrestling matches continued. One dwarf could barely believe that Jack had already defeated 30 people using nothing but his bare fists. Another dwarf openly admitted that it was unbelievable, struggling to accept that such strength could truly belong to a human. At some point, Jack glanced toward Alice. Alice casually smiled back at him and lightly applauded his performance. Seeing that reaction, Jack turned back toward the dwarves and challenged anyone else who still wanted to fight, fully prepared to take on all challengers. Even without a championship belt, he openly welcomed anyone brave enough to challenge the undefeated champion. The group then set out to defeat the lizard bastard, while other dwarves also prepared to join the expedition. Alice had already entered the car, and Jack gave the command for departure. The dwarves around them cheered loudly, announcing that the Dragon Slayer team was officially on the move. The elder told his son to have a safe trip. Jack overheard this and asked whether the elder would not be coming with them, as he had assumed the elder to be some kind of battle maniac. The elder responded that waiting for good news was also something he personally enjoyed. The son immediately thought this was not true, since the elder had even tried to sneak onto the expedition earlier, but agreed that someone needed to remain behind to manage the village. The elder expressed his hope that they would return victorious. Jack replied that they would be back soon and that the village should prepare a proper celebration banquet for their return. Alice stated that they would reach the dragon's hideout in about half a day and that she would focus on detecting any hostile magical presence along the way. With everything ready, Jack and Alice were inside the car while the dwarves surrounded it outside. One of the dwarves stated that they would clear out any smaller monsters on the road ahead. He also told Jack that he was their most valuable ally and advised him to conserve his stamina for the dragon itself. Jack agreed with that plan. A total of 10 dwarves volunteered for the quest. They were among the most experienced fighters in the village, but even so, tension remained high among them. Jack reflected that in this world, a dragon represented one of the most destructive forces imaginable. This battle could very well become the greatest fight of their lives. Under such pressure, it was natural for fear and regret to appear, and a stressed warrior could become more of a burden than a help. Jack also considered that they might even slow the group down during the fight. Because of that, he decided that a simple conversation might help ease the atmosphere. Jack casually spoke to one of the dwarves, remarking that the dwarf looked pale and asking whether he had eaten something bad that morning. The dwarf responded nervously and apologized, then explained that whenever he imagined facing the dragon, he could not stop himself from having unsettling thoughts. Jack responded that feeling fear was completely reasonable. Controlling that fear required a different kind of strength. He clarified that he was not telling the dwarf to simply suppress it, but rather to gradually adjust to it step by step. After all, the thought of battle would naturally frighten anyone. Another dwarf nearby considered Jack's words to be encouraging, even better than anything his father would have said. He then asked whether it meant that Jack himself could also feel fear in battle. Jack laughed and stated that he did not. For him, he actually enjoyed every moment of it. He admitted that he might be a little crazy and advised them not to take him as a standard. The dwarf concluded that Jack was also a battle maniac, similar to his father. Another dwarf from the group turned his attention to Alice and asked about her. He pointed out that she always appeared unusually calm. Alice explained that death was not something that applied to her in the same way as others. Even if she were to be slain, there would still be another her, continuing the cycle again and again from long ago. The dwarves were left confused by her explanation, and even Jack could not fully understand what she meant. Jack then quietly told one of the dwarves that Alice was likely going through a phase and suggested they should simply accept it as it was. The dwarves accepted that explanation without further questioning. Jack considered that the situation had not gone as intended, but he noticed that the dwarves had become more relaxed overall. Alice then stared at Jack without any expression and informed him that a monster was approaching from the right. The dwarves reacted with renewed energy and rushed forward, ready to strike down any monsters in their path. Jack observed that in an actual combat situation, there did not seem to be any decline in her performance. At that moment, a memory resurfaced in Jack's mind regarding the dragon subjugation plan. He proposed planting bombs while the dragon was not paying attention. Depending on the location of its lair, they could potentially flatten the area using only a few explosives. The elder dwarf immediately stated that such a tactic would not work against a dragon. The son dwarf added that the creature would likely return immediately. Jack asked why that would be the case. Alice explained that dragons possessed strong sensing abilities and could detect intruders from a wide range. Jack simply remarked that it was inconvenient. Jack then considered that if he were targeted while planting explosives, he would not be able to properly defend himself. In the worst-case scenario, he might need to rely on a dead man's switch. After that, Jack presented another plan. If the dragon was present, they would begin the battle with a barrage of bombs and bullets. If the dragon approached them directly, Jack would hold it back using his firepower and attempt to take it down. If the dragon was not there, they would instead set an ambush and strike it the moment it returned. That was his strategy. The plan was simple and somewhat too bold to be considered a traditional strategy, but Jack was fully equipped for it. He did not feel there was anything to worry about, as he had always disliked overly complicated plans. He recalled that professionals usually preferred careful, reasonable strategies, something he had once been criticized for ignoring. However, in the past, he had consistently proven others wrong with successful results. This time, Jack intended to do the same again. In his view, it was only a dragon, and he was prepared to take it down. Moments later, one of the dwarves called out to Jack and informed him that they had arrived at their destination, the dragon's hideout. Jack observed the area and noted that the dragon was not present. Alice then urged him to hurry, warning that they may have already been detected by the creature. At that moment, massive wings suddenly appeared overhead, and the dragon revealed itself. Jack calmly stated that they should begin their welcome event. He instructed the dwarves to prepare their weapons and form up. The dragon soared above them and let out a powerful roar across the sky. Watching it, Jack stated that this was exactly what they had been waiting for. With that, the mission began. Jack took a close look at the dragon and casually greeted it while also insulting it at the same time. The dragon reacted by beginning to move. Jack, as usual being overly loud, commented that he had felt lonely, so he had come to strike it down. The dwarves noticed the movement and confirmed that the dragon was preparing itself. Jack instructed Alice to handle the defense. Alice immediately obeyed, placing her hand on the surface of the car and activating a command for the golem to transform. The car quickly shifted form. Jack recognized the attack as the dragon's signature ability, its strongest ultimate move known as Fiery Breath. The dragon unleashed the attack toward them. However, it had little effect due to the magic barrier protecting them, which deflected the flames while Alice maintained the barrier. Alice observed that the dragon's breath attack drained a significant amount of its power. She recalled being told that it was typically used only in emergency situations, meaning the dragon either intended to eliminate them quickly without restraint or was unable to close the distance to them. Jack concluded that using Fiery Breath to wipe out opponents was a reasonable strategy. He had initially assumed the dragon was simply a wild beast, but it now appeared to possess intelligence, though still somewhat crude in its thinking. Once the dragon's Fiery Breath ended, the shield remained intact and unbroken. One of the dwarves noted that the attack had stopped and confirmed they had successfully avoided it. Jack reacted with excitement, stating that it was impressive and describing it as a clear victory for civilization. With the golem car enhanced by high-quality ores, its power had increased significantly. When converted into a shield, it was reinforced with multiple defensive spells, making it extremely resilient. Jack considered the system highly effective. Alice let out a quiet sigh. Moments later, the golem car returned to its normal form. She warned Jack not to become overconfident, explaining that maintaining the defense consumed a large amount of her magic power and that she could not sustain many more spells. Jack acknowledged her warning. The dragon continued to hover in the sky without descending. One of the dwarves observed that it was not coming down. Jack noted that it was simply circling above them, possibly waiting for its breath attack to recharge. He realized they could not afford to fall into the dragon's rhythm. Jack apologized to Alice before asking her to use the spell they had previously discussed. Alice agreed, stating that it was simple enough and instructed him to leave it to her. She then cast the spell toward the dragon, and a magic circle formed near its position. Jack commented that it was good timing. The dwarves, understanding the signal, prepared themselves. Together, the dwarves activated their portable missile launchers at the same time. Although the design was inspired by Jack's old world, the mechanism was built in a fantasy-style structure. The missile itself functioned as a golem, and its head was equipped with a dragon's claw bomb as its explosive core. The dwarf informed Jack that they were ready. Jack responded that everything was fine and gave the order to fire. All of them launched the attack at once. The dragon easily dodged the incoming missiles as they passed by it. However, what it did not anticipate was that the missiles were programmed to return, and they redirected themselves straight toward its wings. Jack observed this and stated that everything was proceeding according to plan. The golem missiles were designed to lock onto a specific mark, which in this case was the pattern on the dragon's wings, making the attack unavoidable. The missile struck the wings and exploded, causing the dragon to fall to the ground. Jack appeared satisfied while the dwarves were astonished that the dragon had been brought down. Amid the thick smoke from the impact, Jack looked toward the scene and asked what they could see ahead. The dragon lay on the ground, struggling to rise again. The dwarves confirmed that it had been wounded and expressed amazement at the result. Jack thought to himself that the golem missiles were a collaborative creation between him and Alice, and it was only natural that they would be effective. The dwarves began celebrating, declaring that Jack had done it and that the mission was a success. Jack immediately interrupted them and pointed out that they were getting ahead of themselves. He then ordered them to proceed to the second phase of the attack. The dwarves obeyed and quickly prepared their weapons again, aiming them at the dragon once more. Jack reflected that they had only conducted half a day of drill training, yet the dwarves were handling themselves better than expected. He even considered that he would not mind having them as his subordinates. Alice stated that she would place the second mark. She cast the marking again, this time onto the dragon's back. Jack instructed the group to launch the missiles into the air and gave the command to fire. However, the attack did not go as smoothly. The dragon clenched its teeth in frustration and unleashed another fiery breath toward the missiles in the air, causing them to explode before reaching their target. Jack acknowledged that the dragon was still standing. The dragon's eyes began to glow, and the dwarves immediately noticed that another attack was coming. Jack quickly instructed them to prepare for Phase 3. Then Jack stopped and decided there was no need to rush. He instead threw a sticky bomb toward the dragon. The explosive clung to its scales, irritating the dragon due to its sticky and elastic effect. Jack instructed the dwarves to wait for his signal. One of the dwarves responded that he understood Jack wanted to take advantage of seeing the dragon up close, but warned that moving in alone would be reckless. Jack replied that this kind of recklessness was exactly how he became a mercenary. He stated that it was his responsibility to prevent the dragon from closing in on the rest of the team, and he intended to show what he was capable of. After that, he turned his gaze toward Alice. Seeing his look, Alice immediately understood what was expected of her. She then turned toward the car, placed her hand on its surface, and commanded it to transform. The car began shifting and transforming into an unexpected form, eventually taking the shape of a massive sword. The dragon reacted with a tremor upon seeing the transformation. Jack remarked that they were witnessing the birth of a dragon-slaying hero and told the others to enjoy the view from the front row. He then dashed toward the dragon. As he closed the distance, the dragon unleashed a fierce roar that momentarily disrupted his momentum, though Jack had already anticipated it. The dragon's claw then swept toward Jack. He was nearly caught off guard, but he managed to jump and evade the strike. Jack realized that the dragon was focusing entirely on him, relentlessly trying to crush him. During the chaos, the dragon briefly lost sight of him. Jack then reappeared above the dragon and spoke to it before descending with a powerful strike, cutting off one of its arms. The dwarves watched in shock as Jack landed safely after the attack. The dragon roared in pain, and Jack immediately gave the signal for the third phase. The dwarves raised their weapons and fired all at once at the wounded dragon. Every missile struck its target without a single miss. The dragon was severely injured and bleeding heavily as it collapsed. Seeing this, Jack told the dwarves that in the end, it was just a wild animal and nothing to be afraid of, comparing it to a giant rabid dog. Just as they believed the mission had been completed, something unexpected caught Jack's attention. The dragon suddenly stood back up as if it had been reborn. Its limbs began regenerating while Jack observed it closely. Alice identified it as a regeneration ability, explaining that it allowed rapid healing at the cost of significant mana consumption. She further assessed that it was likely a defensive mechanism for life or death situations, meaning it would regain its ability to move again very soon. Jack acknowledged that he had heard of such abilities before, but still found it troublesome. He considered that if the dragon continued fighting until its last breath, their side would suffer heavy losses. However, he preferred to bring it down without losing anyone. Alice suggested that they might either overwhelm its regenerative capacity or directly target its weak point to end it instantly. Jack responded that he understood and immediately ordered the dwarf to bring out a specific item. The dwarf agreed, and shortly after, Jack equipped a shield onto his arm. Jack then dashed forward with the intent to kill the dragon. Alice called out for him to stay safe. As Jack closed in, the dragon leapt upward and swung its tail toward him. Jack prepared himself and remarked that even with such severe injuries, the dragon was still acting recklessly. He struck the dragon's tail with his massive sword, causing the ground beneath them to break from the force as he resisted the impact. While holding the clash, Jack noticed a crack forming along the blade. He found it hard to believe, but continued by sliding the sword to deal further damage. The weapon then broke completely. Jack managed to parry the attack even after that, but it became clear that the sword had reached its limit. He glanced toward Alice and assumed she would likely scold him for breaking it. Alice herself silently considered warning him not to overuse such equipment. Jack assumed he would have to be mentally prepared for that. Meanwhile, the dragon once again collapsed briefly, then struck at Jack in irritation with its claw. Jack dodged the attack and noted the dragon's determination, but also observed that its sluggish movements showed it was no longer regenerating quickly enough. Jack then jumped onto the dragon's tail. The dragon attempted to shake him off. One of the dwarves called for the others to assist Jack. The dwarves responded by firing their missiles at the dragon all at once, while Alice instructed them to aim for its body and legs. Jack acknowledged their support. He continued moving along the top of the dragon while the dwarves kept firing at the marked points Alice had placed. Eventually, Jack reached the dragon's eye and mockingly greeted it. Jack pointed the sharp weapon directly at the dragon's eye socket and stated that it was an early present for it. He then drove the blade straight into the eye. The most effective method to kill a dragon with regenerative abilities was to destroy its brain through the eye socket. That was the principle behind the weapon's design, which functions similarly to a pile bunker. The blade itself had been taken from the magic sword. Jack did not know how else to properly use it, so he prepared it as a one-shot weapon, and he was relieved that it worked as intended. The dragon let out a loud scream of pain. Jack commented that he should have brought ear protection, while continuing to mock the dragon for still struggling. He then noticed that the blade had likely reached the dragon's brain, but it had not yet delivered a decisive fatal blow. At that moment, he reached into his pouch and realized there was no other option left. He took out an encore explosive device. Jack placed it inside the dragon's eye and pulled the pin. Moments later, it detonated while Jack was falling away from the impact zone. The dragon's head was completely destroyed. The dwarves and Alice watched as the massive body slowly collapsed. Jack landed safely and looked at the dragon. There were no signs of regeneration remaining. Realizing that it was finally over, he laughed and celebrated, calling it a truly marvelous sight. Jack then commented that the only thing missing was a way to photograph the moment. The dwarves remained stunned, unable to react immediately to what they had just witnessed. Looking at their reactions, Jack wondered what was wrong with the group of people around him and whether something was bothering them. However, he did not pay it much attention. For him, the explosion at the imperial capital had been impressive, but this moment was what truly made him feel satisfied. It was the first time he had been able to take revenge directly. Later that night, as they tied up the dragon's remains, Jack commented that it would be difficult to extract meat from something so large. He considered helping the dwarves with the work. One of the dwarves declined, saying there was no need, explaining that Jack had already done more than enough and should rest. He also mentioned that dinner was almost ready. Jack acknowledged this casually and thought they did not need to be so overly considerate. Jack himself did not feel particularly tired. He had always been confident in his physical condition. Thanks to his high-level status upgrades, he had already surpassed normal human limits and remained in peak physical form. As the meal was prepared, Jack reflected that this was the dwarves' way of showing hospitality, and he felt he could not take that experience away from them. The dwarves informed Jack that dragon meat was known to be highly nutritious. As they continued eating, Jack became quiet and thought about the taste. He could not clearly describe it, but found the flavor to be complex. It was neither good nor bad. On a scale of 100, he estimated it to be around 60. Jack noticed that Alice and the dwarves seemed to enjoy it, and he considered that his expectations might have been too high. For him, however, it was still not unpleasant.